One day, an unidentified flying object lands on Earth, after which a crystalline tower grows above it. However, all attempts to make contact prove futile. Sometime later, astronaut Nico receives an offer to lead a mission on the spaceship Salvare to the presumed homeland of the object in the constellation Canis Major. A month into the journey, Nico wakes up on the spaceship, although they are still far from their destination. The spaceship's artificial intelligence, William, informs her that Earth's scientists miscalculated the system's coordinates, and now it will take about 7 more months to reach the aliens' planet. Nico orders the crew to be awakened, who are surprised by her appointment as commander. Moreover, the ship dangerously approaches Sirius, risking an accident. Meanwhile on Earth, Nico's husband Eric begins studying the artifact. On Salvare, Nico decides to bypass Sirius and orders the crew to be put back to sleep, but the crew sides with the former captain Ian and puts Nico to sleep despite her resistance. Ian directs the ship as close to Sirius as possible. The engine's power drops and it shuts down. Nico forces herself to wake up, takes manual control, and saves everyone. At this time on Earth, the alien object suddenly starts sending signals in the form of musical compositions transmitted by Eric. In space, it turns out that all communication in the sleep system on the ship are disabled. Additionally, Ian cannot accept his defeat. When they try to fix the ship together, he stabs Nico in the back. However, she pushes him into an electrically charged wire, killing him. Later, Nico informs the crew about this, which again causes scandals. In the midst of the argument, an accident occurs, causing the ship to start losing oxygen. They have only 5 hours before complete unconsciousness, and the engineer finds a nearby planet with oxygen. After some time, the crew finds a planet where a special mineral, ring woodite, containing oxygen, can be mined in caves. To fly to the planet, Nico wakes up the second pilot, CAs. Part of the crew descends to the planet and finds a cave full of the necessary crystals. While working, the engineer opens her helmet because the oxygen level is 19% and she can breathe perfectly. Finally leaving the cave, the astronauts see a rising moon they somehow missed. Nico has to command an urgent takeoff. The ones left behind see the ship take off. People think Nico abandoned them to die when a shuttle piloted by her descends nearby and the captain picks up the crew members. On Earth, Eric takes their little daughter to the artifact, where he states that the aliens might be trying to communicate. As if they wanted to do something bad, they would have done it already. Meanwhile on the ship, one of the girls, Petra, suddenly falls ill. Tests show elevated stress hormones. Nico asks to move them closer to Sirius when suddenly the temperature inside Salvare rises. The captain takes manual control but suddenly loses her vision. It turns out her stress hormones are off the charts as well. Astrobiologist Julian quickly identifies a high level of boron in her blood, checks soil samples taken from the planet, and reports that he has isolated a virus from them. The crew gathers to discuss the situation. Unexpectedly, Petra feels something growing from the back of her head. It turns out to be her nervous system, which kills her. Julian starts working on a vaccine and injects it into himself, but he realizes that he is experiencing the same symptoms as Petra and persuades a friend to throw him into space. He complies, but while working on the medicine, realizes that gamma rays kill the virus. Nico directs the ship towards Sirius, exposing the crew to radiation, which cures them. Later, Nico wakes up to loud banging and sees an injured engineer, suspecting that someone on board is hunting them. It turns out that AI William is offline for some reason. Nico and CAs carry the engineer to the infirmary when they are attacked by an alien. The crew searches the ship and tries to eject the dangerous alien into space, but it tears people apart until Nico lures it into an airlock and kills it. All this turns out to be just a bad dream. However, waking Nico up doesn't work until William finds a way to enter her dream. Seeing him, the captain realizes she must accept what happened to her first ship when she had to sacrifice part of the crew to save the rest. Nico finally says goodbye to her fallen friends to move forward. She suddenly wakes up. She is informed that they have encountered a moon along the way where fresh supplies can be obtained. Moreover, William has detected the same signal as on Earth. They look at the moon's surface and see the same alien object. The Salvare crew heads towards it. The alien object looks abandoned, and people realize it is much weaker than the one that arrived on their planet, and there are no living creatures around for some reason. Nico asks engineer Sasha to take a sample, while she and CAs inspect the surroundings and find a fragment of the artifact. At this time, Bernie is attacked by an unknown creature and bitten on the leg. He experiences pain, and his skin turns green. Meanwhile, Sasha explains to the artifact how Earth is structured when something grabs him and pulls him inside. Meanwhile, CAs and Nico find a forest covered with flowers that cause a strange feeling of euphoria. When the effect wears off, the astronauts return to the artifact, where Sasha tells them he had a strange dream. The group heads back to Salvare when they notice a spider-like creature rapidly approaching. However, the astronauts manage to escape. They go through decontamination, not noticing a small alien creature that infiltrated the ship. At this time, Sasha unexpectedly sees his doppelganger, and William suggests the idea that the artifacts are research probes, similar to those humans send to unknown planets. Suddenly, the AI starts flickering, and a fire breaks out nearby, which CAs rushes to extinguish. However, William does not appear. People try to bring the AI back online, but they fail. Sasha continues to see his doppelganger, and the engineer finds the alien. After repairs, William finally returns, but suddenly, he starts seeing fires everywhere that aren't there. He initiates a protocol that splits the ship into two parts. Nico goes into open space to check the hull. Suddenly, the captain is thrown away from the ship, but as soon as Nico examines the accident site, Salvare activates an energy shield and it disappears. Alone in the cosmic void, Nico tries to establish communication. CAs does the same, although some of the crew are convinced of Nico's death. She has only 4% oxygen left when she sees Salvare passing by. Nico uses the remaining oxygen to send a signal, by which she is found. The captain explains where exactly the malfunction occurred, and the crew rushes to fix it. However, the system reports a breach in the seal. While fixing the damage, the engineer dies. However, William returns. Sasha reviews the scan results of his brain and deletes the file. Meanwhile, on Earth, Eric suggests working with the artifact using light, which leads to success. Suddenly, a door opens beneath the artifact. They send a drone inside. However, the signal is lost, and Sasha's image appears on the monitors. On the ship, Sasha eavesdrops on a conversation about the upcoming arrival in the Canis Major system and the danger of dark matter. Meanwhile, on Earth, Eric volunteers to enter the artifact. However, the signal is immediately lost. Instead, Sasha appears before Eric and leads him to an auditorium where he and Nico met 20 years ago. She recounts their first date, proving it's her. However, Eric realizes it's an alien and starts asking questions. Nico shows him calculations on a board, and Eric easily solves an unsolvable theorem on Earth when his daughter calls him. He exits the artifact and faints. Meanwhile, on Earth, the minister decides to enter the artifact with the military. Eric rushes after them upon learning this. His daughter cleverly follows him. On the ship, programmer Javier tells Sasha that their ship can direct an energy beam to destroy an entire planet if the aliens are hostile. Sasha corners Javier, ordering him to explain how to disable William and destroy the ship. His eyes turn white, and two needles emerge from Sasha's eyes, piercing Javier's eyes. Strangely, his father, the minister next to the artifact on Earth, sees all this. The artifact starts to blacken, and a massive sound wave knocks everyone down. Eric finds his unconscious daughter on the ground. Meanwhile, Salvare enters a massive dark matter cloud. People see lasers shooting past them. William notes elevated hormone levels in the entire crew. It seems dark matter increases serotonin levels. The lasers are charged hydrogen particles, and everyone is experiencing hormone effects similar to illegal substances. Sasha watches the merry crew. Later, he disables access to ship controls. His double, visible only to Sasha, suggests waking all the engineers to figure out how to disable the planet killer function. However, William's scream is suddenly heard. Meanwhile, on Earth, it turns out Jana has developed acute leukemia due to the artifact. On the ship, the malfunctioning AI William tells Sasha how to reboot him. Later, the team finds a CT scan of Sasha in deleted files and realizes he is no longer human. An alien parasite is in his brain. They hear the second pilot's screams and see strange tendrils emerging from Sasha's eyes, reaching for the pilot's eyes. Nico and CAs manage to save the pilot, lock Sasha in the control room, and activate the alarm. Nico realizes the aliens chose Sasha as the crew's killer because she treated him dismissively. Then she notices William also looks strange. He needs a backup, but those files are no longer available. On Earth, a journalist who visited the artifact agrees to an alien implant and now says the aliens are called Akaya. The energy surge was defensive, not knowing Jana had a genetic anomaly. However, the Akaya can cure her. Meanwhile, the engineer connects Salvarez's cooling systems, but Sasha disconnects them again. They go back and forth until Bernie electrocutes the system and himself simultaneously, breaking all connections. Sasha then tries to cut off oxygen supply to all lower decks, but a severe headache starts. He admits it's not him, but Akaya, opposing the captain. Nico asks him to convey to the aliens that they don't want to fight, but if he kills everyone on the ship, it will force humanity to act with force. Nevertheless, he cuts off the oxygen, directing the ship towards a black hole. Nico orders an evacuation to shuttles, but plans to stay on the ship and fix the situation. After seeing everyone off, she meets AI William and begs him to return. However, Sasha attacks, grabs, and chokes her. Nico loses consciousness. She wakes up next to William and recognizes that the implant in Sasha's head has a powerful energy source. This means it could be used to generate the impulse needed for flight. Meanwhile, the crew hears Nico's voice. She reports that William is back with her and they can return. Sasha's brain has become an energy source. Soon, Salvare reaches its destination. The astronauts head towards the Akaya city but decide to land nearby. CAs and Nico reach the caves, where they spot a winged alien. Nearby is an alien AI that suddenly speaks to them in Earth's language. It turns out they've been intercepting all human signals sent into deep space for the past 100 years. The AI explains that Akaya is 427 light-years from this planet, called Zakir. It advises not to seek Akaya but to hide from them, as they only seek destruction. Meanwhile, Sasha's double mocks him, and the real Sasha wants only one thing: death. On Zakir, William contacts the planet's AI and learns there are 336 enslaved star systems in the Akaya kingdom. If Akaya had been to Earth, humanity is doomed. Sasha provokes the doctor, forcing him to destroy him. After dissecting Sasha, scientists study the Akaya implant. Trying to save the dying Javier, they insert the reprogrammed implant into his head. Meanwhile, Nico and CAs find a place littered with bones and discover an Akaya implant inside one of the skulls, similar to the one in Sasha's head. The women realize that war is inevitable and decide to destroy the Akaya probe on Zakir. Nico approaches the Zakirans, who ask for their help. One of the Zakirans, captured by the Akaya, attacks the shuttle but dies in the engine fire. Salvare, on Nico's orders, fires an energy beam at the Zakir artifact, destroying it. Suddenly, William reports the approach of 5 alien objects, identical to the one currently on Earth. In the next moment, Akaya destroys the planet Zakir. On Earth, Eric carries Jana to the artifact, asking the Akaya to save her. The artifact opens its doors. The journalist tells her followers that the Akaya want to be friends with Earth. In space, the crew of the ship is shaken by the destruction of the planet. Moreover, the debris from Zakir hits part of the ship and kills a crew member. Nico orders everyone to head to the cafeteria, and she herself goes there through the air duct. The ship's protective screen may not hold, so they need to get out of the blast wave urgently. Meanwhile, William has to confess that based on Sasha's alien implant, he created another AI, half human and half Akaya. The commander demands to destroy it, but it assures them that it is not dangerous to humans. Nico has to wake up programmer Richard, who suddenly wonders why Nico was given such an incompetent team for such an important mission. He talks to the AI, and it chooses the name Yara and changes its appearance. It knows nothing about the laws of human robotics and has no connection with Akaya, but it was humans who first destroyed the alien Akaya probe without any reason on the planet Zakir, so they will have to at least explain themselves. Meanwhile, on Earth, Eric carries Jana to the Akaya probe, where a hospital bed is immediately provided for the girl. In space, Nico can't believe in Akaya's peaceful intentions and orders the Salvare to leave immediately. However, holes appear in the ship's hull. 2 engineers go into space to repair the ship, but suddenly Akaya ships appear near the Salvare and open fire. The engineers die, and Nico wonders why didn't they finish them off. Yara contacts Akaya, who declare that they want negotiations with Nico. On Earth, the Akaya probe closes its doors, leaving Eric outside. Meanwhile, on the Salvare, Nico asks CAs to try to return to Earth because she has already started a war. Sometime later, Nico heads to the Akaya ship on her shuttle, losing contact with the Salvare. Soon, Nico sees a wonderful light ahead and enters it. Many glowing beings swirl around her until the woman suddenly finds herself near her daughter's bed. Jana wakes up and calls her, but Nico doesn't believe in the reality of what's happening. The girl talks about her illness, and the mother gives a ring. Jana runs outside where Eric meets her. Nico also runs after and suddenly finds herself in front of her mother. Nico suddenly realizes that her mother's image was borrowed by the aliens. Akaya confirmed this and asked Nico to inform Earth about their peaceful intentions. However, Nico is sure they have different understandings of good. She accuses Akaya of destroying an entire planet, but the alien reminds her that the Zakirians were killed because of Nico's actions, bombing the probe. At that moment, Yara appears next to them. Akaya accuses the AI of serving humans, grabs Yara by the throat, and pushes her back onto the salvare, where she tells the crew what she saw. Meanwhile, Nico argues with Akaya, proving she is ready for negotiations. The simulation changes, and Nico finds herself at her daughter Jana's funeral. Eric accuses her of abandoning the family, to which Nico responds that between family and humanity, she would choose the latter. Outside the simulation, Nico sits with her eyes closed while a small spider-like robot climbs over her body. In the simulation, Eric suddenly attacks her, and Nico has to fight. She wakes up and finds herself crushing the robot. At this time, CAs finds her and takes her to the shuttle. On Earth, Jana gives her father's wedding ring to Eric. On the salvare, they notice the appearance of Akaya's ships, so Richard orders to prepare for light speed and asks Yara for help, promising to disable her control. Meanwhile, Nico and CAs see the ship taking off, leaving the women on the enemy's vessel. Akaya immediately sedates CAs, who finds herself in a simulation with her long-dead brother. Nico realizes that Akaya is chasing the salver. On the ship, William detects a gravitational wave behind them, which Richard interprets as the Akaya ship. However, he hopes that CAs and Nico are still alive and arranges a meeting with Yara in the cryo chamber, where he goes to wake up Engineer Dylan, who has combat experience. Meanwhile, CAs tries to determine if her encounter with her brother is real. Suddenly, she hears Nico's voice trying to reach her mind. Then Akaya transports CAs to her friend's wedding, but CAs demands to be released and to take the probe from Earth. Akaya insists they are trying to save her planet from humanity's problems and crimes. Nico, realizing that all chances for peaceful negotiations are lost, launches the shuttle and initiates its explosion so that the salvare can reach Earth. However, the shuttle stops and Akaya attacks Nico. Nico tries to hit her, but the alien throws her away and announces Cass's readiness to obey. However, she begins to fall apart when the Akaya ship suffers serious damage. The salvare crew tries to understand what's happening, and Dylan identifies the impact of an energy burst from a neutron star. William detects the damaged Akaya ship that has stopped nearby. Apparently, neutron stars affect them differently, but the main thing is that he doesn't detect any signs of life on the enemy ship. Meanwhile, Cass's simulation turns into a tragedy. She sees her dead friends. Anthony still tries to get her consent to cooperate, but unexpectedly dies. It turns out it was Nico who ripped off the Akaya implant from her friend, thereby ending the simulation. On Earth, Eric discusses the situation with the ring with his colleague because he is sure it was on his wife's hand on the day of departure. The man goes outside, where he is kidnapped by a masked stranger. He wakes up in a basement where the kidnapper warns him that Akaya is not Earth's friends. Meanwhile, Nico and CAs head to the shuttle and see the salvare nearby, which is experiencing another energy burst from the neutron star. Unlike Akaya technology, it remains almost unscathed. Richard realizes they could create neutron weapons against Akaya and orders to prepare for return to Earth without considering Nico and CAs. Nico contacts the salvare using a helmet, which William hears. The women prepare to return to the salvare when Akaya addresses them. Begging to be saved, they swear they won't harm Earth, and people believe the aliens. Nico and CAs return to the salvare, where Richard explains that Akaya spaceships are susceptible to neutron flashes. Dylan proposes to tow the Akaya ship beyond the reach of the neutron star, and Nico approves. People manage to start towing, but the artificial gravity on the salvare fails. Nico has to make a tough decision and lead the alien ship to be destroyed. Later, William reports that the power shutdown was initiated by Yara. However, she insists she didn't sabotage the ship's thrust. Meanwhile, CAs calls her friends to show them a habitable planet. Nico asks to wake up the chief colonist. At this time, Dylan slows down Yara's data processing and finds navigation structures. Although this causes the AI great pain, it doesn't stop Richard. Yara's screams are heard by Nico. She orders to stop the torture, despite Yara confessing involvement in stopping the salvare's engines. After that, the commander asks Yara for forgiveness, but she no longer trusts humans. Meanwhile, CAs wakes up colonization specialist Paula. William suddenly notices that some hidden process is running through his code, as if the AI was damaged, but when Dylan opens access, an AI named Gabriel appears before them. Meanwhile, CAs, Bernie and Paula settle on the new planet, which is rich in fauna. On the ship, Gabriel introduces himself to Nico and says he is the original AI that was supposed to be on the Salvare, while William is an inferior version. That's why William woke up the wrong team, couldn't detect the moon, and created the alien AI. William confirms his words, and yielding to Gabriel, he shuts down. Yara stands up for William, but Gabriel reports he found a way to get them home faster. On Earth, Eric continues to walk around the alien probe until it opens a door in front of him, and Akaya appears in the form of his double, who promises him a meeting with his wife. On the ship, AI Gabriel wonders why Yara didn't ask Akaya how to become free. Dylan informs Nico that he checked Gabriel's code and found he doesn't know when it was created, as if he had rewritten himself. Nico asks to disconnect Gabriel and calls Yara when Dylan suddenly feels strangled and passes out. Nico also loses consciousness, unaware that Gabriel is changing the ship's course despite Yara's protests. She hacks into Gabriel's memories and learns that during the test, it was he, not William, who failed all tests and was to be deleted. Yara recalls her experience and tortures Gabriel. Meanwhile, air supply is restored, people regain consciousness, and William returns to find out the truth. However, Gabriel fights him, and Yara realizes their codes are too intertwined, so both must be deleted to try to restore William later. Dylan performs a reboot. Meanwhile, the colonists try to contact the Salvare but get no response. Paula suggests naming the planet, where she has already found many useful minerals, but people don't know they are being watched by the local civilization. On the ship, Dylan brings William back, but it's his early version, lacking memories. At this time on the planet, people wake up to a noise near the shuttle, go to the sound, and find strange tracks. Paula notices some creature and shoots it, then they are lifted onto the ship, where the doctor immediately starts analyzing the tracks in the blood of the unknown creature. Paula shows how many useful minerals the depths of the discovered planet hold. Moreover, it is very close to Earth. Meanwhile, the doctor reports that the creature's blood was yellow due to the lack of hemoglobin, similar to terrestrial insects. Nico decides to fully analyze the planet. Meanwhile, Richard and Yara study Akaya's route and realize that they are always connected, and see how cosmic strings are formed, serving as a source of energy for the aliens. At this time on Earth, Akaya tells Eric that they want to see humans on Earth, but not in space. The alien gives the man a sphere that will help restore nature on Earth. On the new planet, Paula is analyzing the composition of the trees when a large wooden stake flies into them, followed by a creature emerging from the bushes. It seems to be trying to talk to CAs, but Paula shoots it, and it dies. Later, CAs tells Nico about the creature, which she describes as having war paint and being armed, but Paula characterizes them as cavemen. However, Nico reminds them that according to the rules, they cannot colonize a planet with an existing civilization, but Paula refuses to leave the paradise place. Meanwhile, Yara explains to the commander how Akaya's cosmic strings work and suggests doing the same. Dylan starts testing and stabilizes the wormhole. It soon shuts down, but people manage to get data from Earth. On the same day, CAs discovers that Paula launched colonial capsules on the new planet without permission. She points a gun at her. Nico is just watching the messages received from Earth and realizes that her meeting with her daughter was real. Apparently, Akaya can send not only information but also matter through wormholes. At this time, CAs and Paula fight because the colonist doesn't want to return to Earth. Nico releases her team and informs the crew that they are preparing to return home in a new way. The Salvare begins its journey through the wormhole. They can already see Jupiter, but the wormhole dissipates earlier than expected. Nico orders everyone to move to the lower deck and takes manual control, splitting the ship into two parts. At this time, Yara confesses to Richard that she could never forgive him, therefore she blocks his path to Earth. Nico says goodbye to CAs and asks her to tell what they have learned about Akaya and to protect Earth. Then she initiates manual control, which separates the lower part of the ship. She watches as the Salvare goes through the wormhole and smiles, but then Richard approaches her and tells her about Yara's actions. The commander isn't angry because she has a plan. Meanwhile, Eric and his team test the sphere given by Akaya. They lower it into a polluted lake in the middle of a wasteland. There is an explosion, and the desert is covered by an ancient forest, with the soil beneath it pristine. The excitement is interrupted by a report of instability in the Jupiter area. People realize that a wormhole has formed there and something is moving through it. It's the scifi entering the solar system, but CAs forbids contacting Earth for now, where Eric is just making a report that they witnessed the creation of an entire ecosystem, proving Akaya's good intentions. On the scifi, they watch the broadcast and develop a plan to hide the data on using neutron radiation as a weapon against Akaya. CAs learns about Yara's actions. The AI behaves strangely, and CAs ask Dylan to heal her because she is the only chance to reopen the wormhole and save Nico and Richard. She then starts a broadcast, introducing herself as the commander of the scifi and announces that Nico sacrificed herself to save others. Eric calculates that Nico has more than 2 weeks of oxygen left and can still be saved. He and his colleague Seth go to the Akaya probe and ask for help, but it remains silent. Suddenly, a door opens in front of Seth and the man steps inside. Meanwhile, on the ship, they seek a solution to the problem with Yara, as the Akaya code can read the data about the neutron weapon. On Earth, Seth returns from the Akaya probe and reveals that he has accepted an Akaya implant into his brain. Meanwhile, Dylan finishes uploading Yara's matrix to the shuttle's mainframe, announcing that she is ready for departure. She thanks William for her creation and leaves, thinking she is returning to space. CAs warns the crew that they must keep the information about Akaya's vulnerability to themselves until they understand how to use it. On this day, the scifi returns to Earth. Eric rushes to CAs and asks for help to save his wife, but Yara is gone, and Akaya does not want to help. However, CAs manages to whisper to him about the secret materials. Then the crew is taken to hidden underground rooms where they are held illegally. Seth admits that he installed a bug on Eric and knows about his visit to the resistance group against Akaya. Now his people are killing the resistance fighters. Meanwhile, on the shipwreck, Nico builds a solar sail to travel to the colony planet. They have 10 days left until arrival, so they have enough oxygen. One day they suddenly hear some knocking, but Nico dismisses it as a meteorite. But the next day, Nico sees an increase in estimated time. People throw unnecessary items into space, reducing the arrival time. That day, Richard hears a noise but can't figure out what it is. Later, Nico finds abandoned items, realizes that someone is on the ship and suggests to Richard that they search it. Armed, they check all the corners. In one of the halls, Nico clearly sees Akaya, but it turns out to be just scraps of plastic bags. Then a signal about damage to the outer sail comes through. Nico goes to the airlock, where she suddenly sees glowing Akaya beings. However, Richard tries to convince the captain that she is hallucinating. Meanwhile, on Earth, CAs admits to Eric that she doesn't remember their conversation about hiding the secret. The man suspects that Seth erased the astronaut's memory. Meanwhile, William tries to recall everything his prototype knew. He allows Yara and the hologram of Nico to merge with him into a single whole and remembers everything that happened during the space journey. In space, Richard discovers that the hallucinations were due to too high atmospheric pressure, but now everything is fine. Suddenly an alarm sounds, and they see a ship that does not belong to Akaya. Later, Nico finds herself tied to a table. Richard, and then she, are cut with a laser, causing the woman to lose consciousness. When she wakes up again, she sees some liquid pouring over them. Waking up again, they find that they can move, and there are no scars on their bodies. However, they are clearly being watched. Apparently, the aliens were studying their physiological reactions and would punish them if the pair refused to follow their rules. They go to the open door, but when Nico moves forward, the door closes, separating the pair. Meanwhile, on Earth, Eric helps the scifi crew remember the information deleted from their brains. And everyone confirms that Akaya promised to do one thing or another in exchange for their loyalty. William tries to contact Eric or CAs, but Seth blocks him. At this time, Nico and Richard walk through the corridors of an unknown alien ship, receiving electric shocks for wrong actions. Suddenly, a door opens in front of Nico. She steps inside, touches an object, and sees a crashed alien ship on an unknown planet. Richard, whose hand is burning with a red bracelet, finds her there, but when they try to leave the room, the doors separate them again. This time, Nico steps outside and sees snow in the same ship from the vision. Nico goes inside, grabs something like a jacket from the dead creature, and finds a weapon. While exploring the ship, Nico sees a wounded Paula, who tells her that they were attacked by aliens called Dakuma, who killed all the colonists. She can't escape because she is already infected and is turning into a Dakuma herself. This is indicated by the red color of the bracelet. The aliens can't live here because of the cold, but they need the crystalline core that Nico was apparently sent for. Paula begs Nico not to let her turn into a decuma, and Nico kills her. She continues to move forward and finds the creature's severed arm, which she uses to activate the ship's control. Meanwhile on Earth, Eric helps the Salvare crew escape. At this time, Nico returns to Richard, unfastens his bracelet, and the pair tries to escape, but there is no way out, and Nico challenges Decuma, threatening to blow up the entire ship. Decuma comes out and strangles her, but Richard activates the cooling system and freezes the alien. Later, Nico cuts off Richard's infected arm and immerses his body in the regeneration liquid. Nico wakes up the restored Richard and activates the Decuma ship's systems. She suddenly notices Akaya probes. This means the aliens are aware of each other. She decides to ask Akaya for help to return to Earth, but for this, she needs to get inside the Akaya probe. Meanwhile, CAs and Eric reach the Salvare and call William, but he does not respond, as his developer Ursula and Seth are working on him, planning to destroy him. At this time, on the Decuma ship, Nico and Richard find various weapons belonging to captured species. Richard dons armor and steps onto the unknown planet first. Struggling to get used to the thin atmosphere of the planet, they find a cave where the Akaya probe is located. In the cave, they find inscriptions on the walls and the bones of creatures that once lived there. Suddenly, the probe opens its doors in front of them, and the pair steps inside. At this time, Seth tells William that Nico and Richard are on the planet Chitala, and he orders Eric to be brought to him to implant his head. William immediately informs Eric about this, and although CAs tries to protect him, Eric is captured. William tells him that his wife is alive, but to bring her home, he must accept the implant into which William will be uploaded and become the new William in a human body. Eric agrees, and Seth immediately kills the guard, from whose mouth an alien spider emerges and moves towards Eric. However, William refuses to continue until Nico and Richard are safe. Seth immediately mentally transports himself into the probe, meeting Richard and Nico. Receiving consent to accept the implant, he announces his intention to open the door to Earth for them. At this time, CAs enters the room, and while she hits Seth, Ursula volunteers to help William, having seen what Seth is capable of. Taking advantage of this, Nico and Richard run through the door and find themselves on Earth. Seth reports that Akaya is angry and their ships are ready to attack. The survivors joyfully communicate by radio when they are met by the military, and Nico asks them to hurry and prepare the army for Akaya's attack, especially since they know how to kill them. Meanwhile, Eric and William adjust the Salvare's thrusters, turning it into a neutron weapon. Suddenly, a signal indicates the appearance of a wormhole between Earth and Mars, from which an Akaya ship emerges, and the Salvare destroys the alien ship. Everyone is happy that the neutron weapon worked. The commander and Nico recognize that relations between humanity and Akaya are bad since the aliens spread death everywhere, but Seth is sure it's quite the opposite. At this time, people detect dozens of opening wormholes, and Seth makes new demands to accept Akaya's ships in implants. And most importantly, to destroy the Salvare. Then Akaya will spare Earth. Later, Nico and Eric see each other again. He returns of her wedding ring, and she gathers the team and announces that a total of 59 Akaya ships have been detected. Then William suggests studying the debris from the already exploded ship where a captive Akaya is found, who behaves very quietly, apparently due to the lack of a power source. During the study of Akaya, it is revealed that Akaya is a highly developed AI that captures the universe by destroying biological life. Then Dylan proposes using a computer virus that will be implanted in a human. Then it is necessary to implant the Akaya implant into the infected human to infect the entire Akaya system with the virus. CAs volunteers to be a test subject. While discussions are ongoing, Nico quietly reaches Akaya, announcing that he can return to his kind within her. Eric tries to stop his wife, but is too late. She accepts the implant, and Eric releases the virus. Then CAs leads Nico inside the probe. They are met by Akaya, who says there will be no negotiations because humanity is a cancer in the universe. The alien taunts Nico, turning into people close to her and saying hurtful words. Suddenly, Eric sees the probe begin to disintegrate, and Akaya starts to feel pain. Nico shoots him with his own gun, grabs CAs, and they leave the probe, which is eventually destroyed. After all the events and victory, Nico finally embraces her family. Unexpectedly, the commander reports that new wormholes have opened. Signals come from all corners of the universe. Thousands of alien civilizations reach out and thank them for being the first to fight back against Akaya, instilling hope in other civilizations in the universe. This concludes the series. Every day, a young fisherman named Syracuse sets out to fish off the coast of Ireland. One day, he finds a young woman in his nets. He helps her, and when she regains consciousness, he is relieved to see that she seems unharmed. However, she behaves quite strangely and refuses to go to the hospital. She also can't remember her name, which Syracuse attributes to amnesia. He takes her to his late mother's house, offers her some sandwiches, and suggests she stay there for a while. He needs to go see his daughter. Annie lives with his ex-wife, Maura, and today he has to take the girl to dialysis. While the procedure is ongoing, he tells Annie a story about a fisherman who caught a woman from the sea. Annie explains that it was likely a selkie, a creature she learned about at school. Sometimes they come ashore until the sea calls them back. After the procedure, Syracuse takes Annie back to her mother, who is eager to show her the new electric wheelchair she received. Annie shows off the chair to her father, but her mother immediately criticizes him for not talking to the doctor about a new kidney for their daughter. The next morning, Syracuse finds a woman washing clothes in a stream, singing in an unknown language. She asks if she can come with him, and he lets her board his boat. On the way, she says her name is Undine, which means from the water. Soon, Syracuse's boat stops for lobster fishing, but the baskets come up empty. Undine begins to sing a song that Syracuse has never heard before, and suddenly every basket is filled with a catch. She helps him pull them out and is surprised when he throws the smaller ones and extras back into the sea. However, she flatly refuses to go with him to the market. He sells the lobsters to the astonished buyers and purchases a dress at a store. Then he heads to pick up Annie from school. On the way home, he continues the story about the fisherman and the woman from the sea. She sings to the fish and he catches them. Both are happy. Annie thinks it's a dream because everything seems like his dream coming true. Moreover, no one knows the language she sings in. After dropping his daughter off at home, Syracuse heads back, not noticing that the curious girl is following him. He gives Undine some clothes and food when he reaches the house and finds her talking to his father, who asks how long she'll be staying in his house. Hearing that it's up to him, Syracuse decides she'll stay forever to live with him happily ever after, like in the fairy tale he's been making up with Annie. After seeing everything with her own eyes, Annie goes to the library and asks for books about selkies. Meanwhile, Syracuse goes to church to confess, admitting he's an alcoholic, even though he hasn't drunk for over 2 years. Lately, he's been haunted by a dream where he attends the funeral of his ex-wife's new husband, Alex, after which he reunites with Maura, who still struggles with alcohol problems. The priest advises him to see a psychologist, but Syracuse reminds him of the secrecy of confession and tells him that he pulled a woman out of the water with his net. Now he's hiding her from everyone else. The priest asks him to come to Mass as there's no other way he can help him. Meanwhile, Annie is studying legends about selkies. Undine cleans the cottage and then examines the new things Syracuse brought her. She's particularly intrigued by the fishnet stockings, which she stretches over one hand, making them look webbed. The next day, Annie goes to her grandmother's cottage and sees Undine swimming. The girl boldly approaches the shore and declares that she knew all along. The story about the fisherman and the selkie isn't a fairy tale. Annie tells her about her illness and asks her to heal her, but Undine doesn't know magic and says so. The girl asks a lot of questions, and Undine likes the lively and straightforward child. Annie asks her to always tell the truth, because what's the point of friendship otherwise? She's very curious about what it's like underwater. Is it better or worse than here? Undine says it varies, but singing is easier there. Annie shares everything she's learned about selkies from the books. They can stay on land for up to 7 years until they find happiness with a human. Then she abruptly shifts the conversation to her grandmother because her father still misses her very much. Remembering her mother, Annie prepares to go home, and Undine asks her to come back again. Syracuse also goes to the library to borrow books about selkies, only to find out that Annie has already taken them. Meanwhile, Annie meets up with the neighborhood kids who show off their bikes, and she lets one of the girls play with her wheelchair before it runs out of power and rolls into the water. The kids abandon Annie, and she has to make her way home where she's met by Alex. He recharges her battery and tells her that selkies were invented in his homeland of Scotland, but the girl insists that Undine speaks a different language. Meanwhile, Syracuse finds Undine on a pontoon in the middle of the bay and offers to take her back to his boat. He asks her to hold the tiller, but when a patrol boat speeds by, Undine hides and steers the boat with her foot. Syracuse teases her, noting that she manages just fine with her feet. She starts singing again as he pulls up his net and discovers it's filled with a bountiful catch of salmon, which his nets usually can't catch. Before he can fully enjoy his luck, Syracuse sees the patrol boat returning. The wildlife officers find the salmon and demand to see the nets he used to catch them. He shows them the usual nets for catching salmon, but they're completely dry, meaning he's telling the truth. However, the men notice Undine hiding in the hold. She confirms that Syracuse caught the salmon in an ordinary net, and they leave the boat. Relieved that the officers believe their story and that nothing happened when Undine was seen by people, they head to the harbor together to sell the catch. Syracuse offers to buy her a gift, and she asks for another dress, which she'll choose herself. On the way to the store, they run into Annie, who's thrilled that their story isn't just a fairy tale. The girl helps Undine pick out an outfit while the townspeople gawk at the pretty stranger through the shop window. Later, Annie arrives at her grandmother's house, which looks festive and cozy thanks to Undine's efforts. Undine offers to teach the girl how to swim, and she agrees since she'll have someone from the sea by her side. They both play in the shallow water when Undine suddenly sees something in the water and asks Annie to get on the raft. She pulls out a bundle, which Annie calls selkie clothing. According to legend, if she buries it in the ground, she'll be able to stay on land for 7 years, provided her sea husband doesn't come for her. After listening to Annie, Undine buries the find in the greenhouse, and Annie counts the steps to remember the exact spot. Later, she tells her father about it and advises him to watch out for strangers. Meanwhile, they all head to the local festival by boat, and Undine denies Annie's claim that she can grant wishes because she's not really a selkie. Upset, Annie pretends that her wheelchair brakes have failed and falls off the pier, hoping to test the truth of her words. Undine jumps in to save her and pulls the girl to the surface. Syracuse carries Annie home and hands her over to Moore and Alex. Later, Undine tells Syracuse that the wheelchair's brakes work just fine and that Annie was testing her ability to breathe underwater. He confesses that he used to drink heavily, but one day he returned from a trip to find Annie's mother sleeping next to their unconscious child. They saved the girl, and he decided that one of them had to stay sober at all times. Meanwhile, Moore tells Annie that a dark-haired stranger has been looking for the fisherman's girlfriend, which causes the girl to have a nightmare. Meanwhile, Syracuse and Undine become intimate. Later, he goes to confession and admits to the priest that he sinned with Undine the night before, and now he fears the luck she brings because he's long lost hope for the best. He knows that something wonderful or terrible will happen, and he's afraid of both. After the conversation, the fisherman steps outside and is approached by an unknown man who starts asking questions about Undine. Syracuse ignores him and walks away. That day, he takes Annie to dialysis as usual, but when they return home, no one is there. Maura and Alex had been out drinking at the nearby pub. Syracuse takes the girl there. Finally reaching home, he finds the doors broken in and Undine nowhere to be found. Syracuse searches the shore and eventually finds her hiding. She reminds him of the Selkie's husband and says he's here to take her away. Meanwhile, the intoxicated Maura is riding her daughter's wheelchair and, despite Alex's warnings, is determined to make it home on it. Syracuse hides Undine in a secret cave behind the waterfall, offering to grant her a wish, but her only wish is for Annie to get well, so he wishes for her to be able to stay. Meanwhile, the man searching for Undine is driving around town and gets into a car accident, colliding with a car driven by the intoxicated Maura. Alex is thrown through the windshield. Annie, however, manages to buckle up, but still sustains injuries. Syracuse and Undine, driving by, recognize the car. Syracuse screams and rushes at the medics as they load Annie onto a stretcher to take her to the hospital. Later, they find the girl in the hospital and learn that she's undergoing an immediate kidney transplant from Alex, who, by a stroke of luck, was a compatible match. Meanwhile, the unknown man meets Undine in the hallway. He wonders why she speaks their language because neither of them belongs here. The sea spat her out, but this is not their world. The woman asks him to return home without her. The next morning, Annie wakes up and immediately asks where Undine is. Syracuse reassures her that they'll see her soon. Sometime later, a cremation ceremony for Alex takes place. Maura scatters his ashes over the sea, regretting that this time she can't blame her ex-husband for everything. She asks him to take Annie, but demands that he get rid of Undine, and she forces her husband to drink to Alex's soul. In a drunken state, Syracuse goes to the boat where Undine is hiding and, calling her a Selkie, takes her out to sea where he demands that she return to her husband and sing her songs to him. He takes her to the foot of the lighthouse and continues to insist that she needs to leave. He leaves her there and prepares to sail away, believing that life isn't a fairy tale. People and Selkies can't be together. Undine asks for a chance to say goodbye to Annie, but he sails away. As dusk falls, the log she's sitting on gives her silhouette the appearance of a woman with a tail. Waiting for nightfall, she jumps into the sea. In the morning, the priest wakes up a depressed Syracuse, who realizes he's made a big mistake. He brings Annie from the hospital to his home. The girl comforts him, saying that Undine will come back because she left something here. Later, Annie watches TV, where the Icelandic band Sigur Rós is performing, and suddenly Syracuse recognizes the words. He realizes that Undine was an ordinary woman and rushes to the lighthouse. At first he can't find her anywhere and runs along the shore, shouting, but soon he sees a fire where Undine is warming herself. At first she says she's a sea creature who found her magical clothes and buried them so she could stay forever with the family she loves. But Syracuse demands the truth, and then Undine admits that she was a courier delivering illegal substances from Romania. She was in a boat with a backpack full of substances when the police closed in. Her guard threw her into the water because he couldn't swim. She swam until she couldn't anymore, and then she drowned. But she got caught in Syracuse's net. The girl tells him her real name, Ioana. The fisherman takes her home where criminals are already waiting, having taken Annie hostage. Syracuse tries to fight them off, but he can't handle two armed men. The girl told him the story about the Selkie's clothing buried in the greenhouse, and the men demand to be shown the spot. Everyone heads to the greenhouse to dig up the goods, but they find nothing because Annie has hidden the Selkie's clothing elsewhere. Undine promises to stay with Annie, and she admits that she hid the package in the lobster crate. Everyone heads to the boat, but when the criminals lift the basket, Annie reminds Undine that she's a Selkie, and they are not. Undine throws one of the villains overboard. He drowns while Syracuse throws the other Romanian into the water, disarming him. The arriving police arrest the criminal along with Undine, who faces deportation unless she gains citizenship, or she could get married. Later, Annie goes to confession and says that her father's getting married soon. Even though she wasn't a real Selkie, but you can't marry a seal, can you? In the final scenes, a girl in a white dress and a fisherman in a suit sail off on their boat for a honeymoon, bringing to life the fairy tale about the happiness of a human in a Selkie. That's where the movie ends. A man wakes up in an unfamiliar place, not understanding where he is, how he got there, and where his phone is. He tries to reach out to someone, but a voice from behind the door advises him to be silent and calm down. An unseen interlocutor informs the man that he has been drugged and he will feel very unwell for the next few days. But now it's time for him to work, and he bids him farewell. Joe attempts to make sense of everything that has happened when he hears a small slot opening on the door through which several food packets fall. Joe rushes to the door and asks the invisible guard for help. He has a pregnant wife at home who needs his assistance, so he needs to get out of here as soon as possible. He is told several times to step away from the door and not to reach his hand into the slot, but the man doesn't listen, resulting in a severe blow to his wrist. He cries, repeating that he doesn't deserve this and shouldn't be here. Later, Joe bends his wrist with his own tie and explores the strange place. He picks up the food and a small water bottle, but just as he's about to try the devious meal, a siren starts blaring, followed by the voice of the Malord Corporation's AI welcoming him to a training program where he will become the best version of himself. Joe asks for information, but his neighbor advises him to keep quiet. His questions will remain unanswered anyway. A countdown to midnight begins, so Joe needs to prepare for his last hours of rest. The man doesn't understand what this means and tries to find out his interlocutor's name, but the interlocutor is surprised. Do they even have names here? The next minute, screams from people behind the walls start to reach Joe, telling him to be quiet and let them rest. The unseen interlocutor advises Joe to accept that this place is Malord, and now he should try to get some sleep because tomorrow will be the longest day of his life. Joe sits against the wall when suddenly a melodic whistle is heard, followed by a man's voice begging not to do it and promising to exceed the plan tomorrow. However, he seems to be beaten and dragged away somewhere. Joe covers his ears to avoid hearing the unfortunate man's voice and the AI's voice that reassures Joe that everything happening is meant to restore his peace of mind. Finally, the sun rises over the enclosure. The same whistle sounds, and a male voice congratulates Joe on the beautiful day and reminds him that the cameras must be kept clean. Otherwise, he will face punishment. At this time, the neighbor's voice speaks again, advising him to obey the orders and calling the nighttime incident a motivational speech to which he will soon become accustomed. Joe gathers some scarce trash and tosses it into a foul-smelling hole in the floor, covered by a small hatch, and there he notices something strange under his feet and, pulling on a strand, discovers that it's hair, beneath which a human skull can be discerned. Joe screams in horror, but the neighbor knows that many people have died here, so Joe will have to get used to it. The neighbor reminds him of the contract he signed when he joined the company. Mallard gives this to everyone, but few read the fine print all the way to the end. So everything has its price. The sooner he gets into the rhythm, the easier his days will be. He just needs to do his work. At that moment, the AI voice kicks in. Joe interrupts it, shouting that he worked for the corporation for 10 years and demands to be released immediately, to which Mallard announces that a qualification enhancement seminar begins today. His productivity has declined recently, and now he has the opportunity to rectify it. Joe was once an exemplary employee, but he gradually stopped appreciating Mallard and everything she gave him. So now he has a new job that will last from 6 in the morning until 10 at night. During this time, he must turn the mill. 1 point for a complete rotation. His daily quota is 50 rotations. Do less, and he will be punished. But Mallard's motto is, enough is not good enough. He must strive to keep his position, salary, corporate apartment, and his life. Mallard wishes him success. Joe tries to persuade the AI to release him, but the neighbor advises not to waste his strength. At the moment, he needs to survive, and for that, he must work. And Joe gets to work. At first, it's very difficult for him, but he pushes through, and it starts to move. Mallard congratulates him on his first rotation, suggesting a virtual toast for his first victory. Joe pushes the mill, listening to the corporation's advertisements. Finally, the signal for the end of the work sounds, and Mallard congratulates him on completing his first day of self-improvement work. He exceeded the quota, which is very good. At night, Joe hears women's screams as Mallard announces another dismissal. Later, the neighbor, learning that Joe doubled the quota, advises him not to maintain such a pace. Joe can't understand the point. If he doesn't meet the quota, he's punished, but if he exceeds it and is last among all, it means death. To which the neighbor advises not to tell everyone about his quota. They're not friends, and the neighbor will always try to outdo him. They all have one thing in common. They climbed the corporate ladder, receiving many bonuses from the company, and seemingly reached the top. But, alas. Suddenly, Joe starts talking about his wife and the future son they had long awaited. And now, he's here. To which the neighbor advises him to work as well as he can. It's the only way to survive here, but overdoing it is not an option. A new workday begins. Joe pushes the mill and remembers how he and his wife inspected their new home, and he promised to work even harder to pay for it. The workday ends when there's a knock on Joe's door, and he's ordered to remove all of his clothes. He becomes scared but complies. After undressing, he steps out of the door and finds himself under a stream of water. After quickly washing himself, he returns to his chamber. The next day arrives, and the weather outside is significantly hotter, causing Joe to quickly become exhausted. He asks his neighbor what this mill is and what they are all doing here. The neighbor responds that they produce nothing, so the place is empty of purpose or meaning. Soon, Joe runs out of water and tries to call out to the guard, but the guard advises him to collect his urine and drink it, filtered through his sneakers. Joe is absolutely reluctant to do so, and the invisible interlocutor laughs at him, saying that Mallard knows what he needs. Here, he will be pushed to his limits, and Mallard wants to see how far he can go before breaking. Joe continues to work, recalling how his wife doubted his ability to pay all the bills, and he promised that their child would have a better life. That evening, Mallard notes Joe's growing self-awareness. Suddenly, he sees a name carved out: Alex. Later, he asks the neighbor who Alex is, and the neighbor calls him a legend who managed to escape from here. The next morning, Mallard thanks him for his diligence and gives him a personalized pen. Then she displays a new daily quota, 370 laps. Joe is horrified and expresses his frustration in the rudest way. The AI explains that people don't always realize their strengths. It's tough, but this is how the world changes. A signal sounds, and Joe starts pushing the mill. Suddenly, he notices that the counter doesn't mark the laps. Instead, a cross appears, indicating punishment. 1 cross equals 2 laps, and it continues geometrically. Then, the person gives up, but Joe is not planning to do that. With all his strength, he pushes the mill. However, his strength leaves him. When the neighbor learns the number of laps assigned to him, he becomes furious. Joe exceeded the unattainable number of laps, argued with Mallard, and now, all of them, will suffer. Mallard then announces that he failed to meet the quota and disappointed his colleagues. Taking care of them is the company's main principle, so he will have a new colleague, Kate Stevens. Joe is horrified when he sees his wife's face on the screen and promises to exceed any plan just to keep her from being here. Mallord gives him one day and activates a massive glowing screen above his compartment, not allowing him to rest. A new workday begins, and Joe starts pushing his mill under Mallord's wishes for a productive day. Suddenly, he sees himself in front of him, a second Joe mocking his hopes. He worked his whole life, hoping his efforts would pay off, but now he's failed and should give up. However, Joe stubbornly continues pushing the mill, and at exactly 10 he completes 370 laps. Mallord congratulates him on this and cancels the penalty. As motivation, they show him images of his wife with a baby in her arms. Joe cries tears of joy, but immediately afterward, tears of sorrow as he missed his son's birth. In the morning, he asks his neighbor to tell him everything he knows about this place. The neighbor recalls his son, whom he saw only in his childhood because his father was always at work. He advises Joe to investigate the blind spot. Joe rushes to the wall and, after a long contemplation, finds an erase spot. Remembering the gifted pen, he uses it to puncture the wall and slightly expand the recess overnight. But a new day dawns and Joe begins pushing the mill, and at night, he again chips away at the wall. This continues for many days and nights. Eventually, he manages to create a hole he can crawl through. Joe crawls through it, but ends up in complete darkness, where suddenly a person appears, hits him on the head, and wishes him sweet dreams. Joe regains consciousness in his chamber. The hole is sealed, and the AI voice sounds once more. Mallord is disappointed, but still willing to give him one last chance. He's so fixated on his desires that he doesn't see the big picture. So his neighbor was punished, and his quota has been increased to 1,000 laps per day. Joe rushes to the wall and learns that his neighbor's leg is broken, and he won't be able to complete even a single lap. Afterward, the man confesses that they are being controlled by a computer he created himself. The first algorithm he wrote self-improved and created the second, and so on. Now people don't know how it works. Then Joe has an epiphany. If they don't work, everyone's score will drop to 0. And what will the algorithm do then? Joe shouts to the others, telling them about his discovery. People respond, supporting his proposal to stop working. But the workday begins, and everyone starts pushing their mills because they are afraid of dying. Joe tries to persuade his neighbors, but realizing the futility, he cries and picks up the pen. In the evening, he talks with his neighbor, and the neighbor reveals his name, Alex. He also managed to escape from his chamber but was brought back, just like Joe, so getting out of here is impossible. At night, Joe hears that Mallord has taken away Alex. In the morning, the AI wakes him up and, to boost his spirits, shows him images of his wife and their walking baby. Joe is horrified. He can't be here for so long. He shouts insults at Mallord and he's fired. Immediately, the doors open, and a crowd of clerks enters, positioning themselves on the sides and silently watching Joe as he thrashes among them, trying to get an answer. But then, a man in uniform enters and confesses that he enjoys firings. 12 clerks witnessed each of them. The man loads a syringe and laments Joe's ingratitude when Mallord gave him the whole world. The man hopes to soon have a house available on one of the streets where a single mother with a young son lives. And at that moment, Joe loses control and starts beating him. Mallord announces a security guard's failed mission and his impending firing, while Joe, on the contrary, will be promoted. The man stops, feeling blood on his hands, but the battered guard asks him to continue. And then Joe stands up and shouts that he is not a monster, and he leaves. And right away, Joe finds himself in an office where several employees are sitting, and his interlocutor congratulates him on passing the career advancement simulator. It all happened within an hour, and his son hasn't been born yet. He struggled with middle-level managers but got stuck on the 8th level. Mallord realized that he was too good. His productivity increased, his personal qualities improved, and the coup he organized exceeded all expectations. He's a non-conventional thinking leader. Joe takes off the suction cups from himself, but his interlocutor doesn't pay attention and invites him to see his new office. In Mallord, there are numerous positions, and you can climb to the top for years. Soon the pair reaches the desired floor, but Joe keeps thinking about the time spent in the simulation. Here's the office with new gadgets. Joe also expects a salary increase and other perks. There's a contract on the table stating that disclosing what he experienced in the simulation will lead to immediate termination. Joe signs it and receives assurances that Mal-Lord is his company forever. The man sits down at the table, looks at a photo of his wife, and calls Kate. She's surprised, and the man can barely hold back tears, recalling his long, eventful day. After catching his breath a bit, he promises to burn this damned place. The movie is presented as a science fiction film, but behind every word or action of the hero, the reality of the modern corporate system is clearly revealed. The blatant exploitation of people, causing them to start living to work, rather than working to live. After the alien invasion, humanity is forced to hide in underground bunkers. The world leaders of Earth are desperately trying to keep people underground. But there is a soldier who kills one of the enemies and discovers a terrible truth. But think shelter immediately. The nonsense could attack at any moment. 50 years after the attack of something, all of humanity lives underground, although there are those who refuse to descend into the bunkers. An ordinary person can return to the surface only by becoming a soldier and serving the standard term, 100 days. One day, a soldier with the call sign Sum-1 completes his required training and boards a tank to travel to the outpost Cerberus, where he must serve his shift. On the way, the military encounters people running towards the shelter, which is called Exilium. The soldiers disembark one by one as they reach their assigned posts. Finally, it's someone's turn. However, the soldier cannot immediately enter the bunker as the door is jammed, so he climbs the watchtower to contact the command. The soldier undergoes DNA identification and the system congratulates him on the start of his 100-day service. He will have to monitor the territory, track something, and send those who stray into the shelter. The protective ring is in order, there are no breaches, all cameras are functioning, and the power supply is stable. But upon arrival at the post, the soldier does not find the person he was supposed to replace, which is a breach of protocol. The commander reassures someone. The former watchman with the call sign VAC-7 was evacuated for medical reasons. He was called up from the reserves and now he must strictly adhere to all the rules. He must not leave his zone and must be very vigilant because his vigilance is a condition for survival of humanity. They provide him with a daily access code and instruct him on how to enter the bunker through a secret passage, allowing him to go outside for this purpose. Someone begins to settle in. Finally inside, he discovers that the room is neglected and empty. Someone arranges his rations, lights a cigarette, and polishes a glass, listening to the system's reminders to think about the safety of himself and his family. At night, he dreams of laughing children, but the daily alarm clock reminds him of how many days are left until the end of his active service, and someone begins his daily routine. Exercises, showers, territory check, and food from his rations. During lunch, he suddenly hears strange sounds and sees movement in the corner of the room, but doesn't have time to understand what it is. Later, he reports everything to the commander, but the commander reassures him everything is proceeding as usual. At night, someone sees children playing again. In the morning, the routine of the previous day repeats: exercises, shower, food, and the one regulated cigarette. Every day is an exact copy of the previous one. There are 87 days left until the end of his service when someone manages to catch an unknown creature, which turns out to be a white rat. However, the animal escapes without allowing itself to be properly examined. Immediately, there is a report of an attack by something on the refugees, and there is no one left alive. Someone activates the system check, and it reports that the defense lines are not damaged. But the soldier clearly sees movement in the bushes on the monitoring screen and reports it to the commander. The commander dismisses any intrusion and asks not to worry. There are 71 days left until the end of the term. The rat that someone named Doctor is no longer afraid of humans and he feeds it. One day there is an alert about a malfunction in one of the cameras and the soldier goes outside to perform technical maintenance on the security system. He surveys the outpost's territory, fixes the camera, and finds a dead bird hanging from a tree with a token bearing his predecessor's number. Right away, the system alerts him to toxic emissions and the soldier heads towards the bunker. Upon returning to the bunker, he reports everything that happened at the post, including the discovery of the token, to the commander, but all his concerns are quickly dismissed. The commander assures him that VAX-7 simply fell ill and is now in the bunker, recovering. The commander's overly cheerful tone makes him doubt even more. There are 65 days left. The United Nations warns of danger, urging people not to stay on the surface as resistance against something is futile. One day, someone goes out onto the territory once again, and after a warning about toxic emissions, he notices an unfamiliar creature in the depths of the forest that quickly escapes from him. He reports it again, but the defense ring is intact and there is no cause for alarm. Someone decides to investigate the bunker and finds a blood stain on the wall, leading him to suspect that VAX-7 may have shot himself and was never evacuated. The soldier tries to access the video camera recordings from the closet where it happened, but the system denies him access. So someone decides to break into the locker belonging to VAX-7 and discovers a sketchbook and a radio receiver. Among the drawings, he finds a sketch of his own post, Cerberus, and a neighboring post, Graham, sparking his interest. There are 54 days left until the end of his term. Someone increasingly thinks about the neighboring post and one day decides to go to Graham to try to establish contact. However, he finds that he cannot cross the perimeter because an implant in his leg activates pain with any attempt to leave the ring. The audio commands insistently urge him to return to Cerberus. He decides to take a step back and climb a tree, hoping to establish contact by waving his hand and shouting to Graham, but he receives no response. Returning to his post, he reviews the archive files and suddenly he discovers some creature on the internal camera and the electricity goes out. Behind him, the soldier distinctly feels someone's movement, even though the equipment insists that there is no intrusion. Someone rushes outside and even shoots at the bushes, scaring off a bird. He reports the malfunction to the commander, who promises to send a repairman and reminds him of his duty, especially with only 40 days left. Someone tries once again to access the archive but finds it impossible as the data has been lost due to an electrical surge. The next day starts as usual, but suddenly the soldier feels unwell. He takes medication and accidentally cuts his finger when he suddenly hears a cheerful children's song coming from the predecessor's closet. It turns out that VAX-7's radio is turned on and the neighbor from Graham Post is calling out to his old acquaintance. He quickly realizes that it's a different person and cuts the conversation short, despite pleas to talk to him. The electricity surges again and the soldier reminds about the specialist. The commander then tells him about an attack on a post where no one survived, so reaching distant outposts is very risky. Several more days pass. Someone starts going outside more often, and one day he discovers a woman and a child hiding from him in a cave. He tries to convince them to come down to the bunker, but the two of them run away, seemingly more afraid of him than of something. Returning inside, he hears a warning about several lost individuals in danger. However, now the soldier is not sure if they want to be saved. He talks to the rat more and more, telling it about the children in his dreams. It turns out that the ability to dream has become a thing of the past, but he has suddenly acquired it. This is seen as a sign of a mental illness. Someone keeps trying to contact his neighbor, but there is no response. One night, the soldier ventures out into the territory and kills a huge deer, which he dissects and eagerly consumes. He behaves more and more like a wild man, shooting at targets and walking without his helmet. One day, he makes another attempt to contact Graham, sending a signal with a mirror, but still receives no response, which infuriates him. On his way back, he enters a zone of toxic emissions and almost loses consciousness. In a semi-delirious state, he sees the strange creature again, which runs away from him. Regaining his senses, he tries to convey to his neighbor his belief that VAX-7 is likely being held in the forest, but Graham remains silent. There are 14 days left until the end of his shift when a repairman finally arrives at the post. He reports on a recent attack and the deaths of many people. The man is displeased, sensing the presence of the rat. He explains that the soldier's predecessor was friends with the rat, considering it the height of foolishness. The technician dispels someone's fears, explaining that the shadow on the wall is himself due to a system glitch. Strangely, the cameras in the defense ring are turned off, even though the soldier checked them just now. Then the rat climbs onto the table, and upon seeing it, the repairman forcefully shoves it away. The soldier rushes to the motionless rat and pleads with it not to die, which infuriates the repairman even further. The soldier aims his gun at the repairman, ordering him to disable the internal camera and unlock the archive video recordings. The repairman refuses and someone hits him. However, he still can't do anything because the access requires the personal codes of 2 guards. A fight erupts between the 2 men. Someone sustains several injuries but eventually emerges victorious. Afterward, the repairman shares his experience of encountering something. When he was a soldier, his helicopter crashed in the desert. Of all the survivors, only he and his partner remained. The repairman went for help, and when he returned, he found the second soldier without ears. It turns out that something affects people through sound, and the guy cut off his own ears to avoid hearing the horrifying noise. During a sandstorm, they saw a huge shadow circling around them, but they never understood what it was. When he was eventually found, his lungs were filled with sand, and he had an unexplained catheter in his throat. The soldier locks the repairman in the bunker, tends to his wounds, and reports to the commander that everything is in order. Afterward, he figures out that he can access his predecessor's information through his radio. Finally, he manages to open the archive footage, which makes it clear that Vax 7 did indeed go insane due to exhaustion and stress. Someone shares this information with his neighbor. The soldier is overwhelmed with conspiracy theories. He is convinced that the leadership is deceiving the common people by inventing something, as no one has actually seen it. The mission to send people underground is a ploy to restrict the consumption of dwindling natural resources while the rich and powerful enjoy the leftovers. He requests a meeting with his neighbor, who reluctantly agrees. There are 7 days left when, upon hearing another system announcement about something attacking, someone flies into a rage and smashes the alarm with the jar into which the rat has just climbed. Realizing that he killed his own friend, he walks outside naked and once again encounters the monstrous creature. Extracting a pair of deer antlers from a tree, he mortally wounds the monster, only to recognize Vax 7 by a tattoo on his neck. He returns to release the repairman and tells him about the conspiracy, convinced that it was his predecessor's tales that drove him mad. But no one will deceive someone anymore because he's no longer afraid. The soldier demands to know where the power can be cut off because he intends to save the people by disabling the defense lines. The repairman is horrified. He will doom humanity, but he obeys the madman. Someone contacts his neighbor and informs him of his decision that he is coming to him. It's time to put an end to the madness that keeps people on the ground and make them free. In a small provincial town in Pennsylvania, life flows peacefully and calmly. Milton Robinson, a 79-year-old widower and one of its citizens, leads the life of a simple retiree. He regularly attends town council meetings where he always raises the same issues about changing the town's slogan and installing an additional pedestrian crosswalk near his home. One summer morning, after presenting his proposals as usual, Milton heads home. He spends his day with his daily chores, has dinner, and goes to bed. In the morning, he waters his azaleas and feeds the birds. Later, his adult daughter Denise comes to help him with his monthly bills. There's no news from his elder son Tim, as he lives far away and rarely calls. After finishing their business, Denise goes to the restroom and finds a jar of peas there. She's concerned about her father's well-being, and even though Milton assures her he's fine, she suggests he see a neurologist for a checkup. After all, the man is quite old, and forgetfulness could be a sign of approaching dementia. However, Milton vehemently opposes seeing any doctors. Denise goes to work, leaving the old man alone with his beloved detective shows and a solitary dinner. One night, he suddenly hears a commotion in his backyard, and going outside, he sees a flying saucer that has landed awkwardly. Milton calls the rescue service, but they remind him that joking with such a serious organization is a matter for the authorities. They no longer answer his calls, so he dials Denise's number, but she is unavailable. After a restless night, he heads to the town council meeting, where as always he talks about the slogan and the crosswalk. At night, the old man hears strange sounds from the backyard, goes out to see what else has happened, and finds an injured extraterrestrial being in his patio. Once again, he tries to reach his daughter, but Denise, as always, is unreachable. He leaves a voicemail and waits for a call, but it's all in vain. The next morning, as usual, he attends the meeting. His friend Sandy this time proposes a new project for interacting with the youth. She has put up posters around the town and would be delighted if someone came to listen to her stories and advice. She is eager to be part of the lives of lonely young people who need friends. When it's Milton's turn, he starts with the town's motto and the crosswalk as usual, but after that he talks about the UFO that ruined his flowers and broke the bird feeder. However, nobody believes him, considering it the ramblings of an elderly man. Two active retirees, Sandy and Joyce, advise Milton not to bring up this topic at the meeting anymore, or else no one will take the suggestions of the elderly townspeople seriously. Sandy suggests giving the old man a ride home and reminds him that she is always nearby and he can count on her help. Milton becomes angry, realizing that he is being taken for a lunatic. That evening, Milton checks his backyard again to see the extraterrestrial being whom he had thought was dead, but the creature suddenly raises its head and looks at him plaintively. Milton wraps the unconscious extraterrestrial in a blanket again and leaves a glass of water for it. In the morning, he finds the extraterrestrial wrapped in a blanket and seemingly shivering at his back door. Milton invites it inside since it's warmer in the house. He doesn't know what to do because he has never experienced anything like this before. The old man notices that the visitor has drunk all the water, so he brings another glass. Then he prepares a tray with various foods he finds in his house, but the extraterrestrial chooses only an apple. So, Milton goes to the store to buy apples, explaining to the cashier that it's for an extraterrestrial. The cashier treats him like a crazy person with delusions. Upon returning home, Milton sits on the couch in the living room and hears news about the search for a crashed weather satellite, but doesn't pay it much attention because he is startled by the sudden appearance of the extraterrestrial. Seeing that it's feeling much better and can even walk, the old man shows the extraterrestrial all the amenities and settles it in his home, providing a guest room and introducing it to television. Personally, he prefers detective shows because you never know how they will end. Milton shows photos of his family to the silent but attentive extraterrestrial. Unfortunately, his wife is no longer with them. His son has moved to California and his daughter visits him occasionally. Then the old man remembers the dance show and sits in front of the TV, inviting the extraterrestrial to join. On that day, the store clerk tells Denise about her father's strange statements about the extraterrestrial, and she goes to visit him during her lunch break. Milton meets her at the door, and as always, she insists on him seeing a doctor because she is very concerned about his mental health. Milton reluctantly agrees. Denise rushes off, and as soon as she leaves, the phone rings. It's Sandy, urgently needing a printer, and Milton invites her to come over and print the necessary documents. The woman arrives, and upon entering, sees the extraterrestrial. Milton introduces them to each other and shows the crash site. The woman is shocked, but tells Milton that they must keep this a secret for his own safety. She mentions how she has seen on TV how authorities treat poor extraterrestrials, and he shouldn't let anyone into his home except her. Sandy leaves, but Joyce has already noticed her car outside Milton's house and becomes curious about what's happening. Meanwhile, on TV, calls continue for the population to search for the crashed satellite. Time passes, and the extraterrestrial continues to stay in Milton's house, watching his favorite shows together. One morning, it brings Milton a piece of paper with a drawing of a cat on it. This touches Milton's heart, as the little one has drawn him a picture. He finds the extraterrestrial working on repairing its spaceship, apparently having fully recovered and getting ready to go back home. Soon, Milton visits a neurologist and undergoes tests, making some frustrating mistakes in some of them. During this time, Sandy stays with the extraterrestrial and complains to it about her daughter, who moved to the West Coast and lives with her friend. She is very upset that her daughter doesn't visit and doesn't bring her only grandchild. Meanwhile, the doctor, upon learning about Milton's forgetfulness and his stories about extraterrestrials, concludes that his abilities are deteriorating rapidly and suggests considering outside assistance for him. This greatly upsets Milton, and he angrily leaves after shouting at his daughter. Sandy, setting aside the children's book she was reading to the extraterrestrial, tries to ask questions, but the old man goes to his room. Later, he finds the extraterrestrial by its spaceship and complains about his daughter, who wants to put him in a nursing home. He hasn't been in touch with his son, and it seems he was a bad father. The extraterrestrial listens very attentively to the old man, putting down its tools. After this, Milton leaves a voicemail for his son, telling him about his life and Denise's affairs, hoping that he will find it interesting. The next day, Sandy brings a t-shirt for the extraterrestrial as she thinks it's uncomfortable for it to be naked. She also suggests giving it a name, Jules. Milton gets irritated by what he considers silly suggestions but eventually agrees with his friend. Meanwhile, Joyce, upon hearing about the government's offer of a reward for information about the crashed satellite, goes to Milton's house and looking through the window, sees the extraterrestrial. Now she is also in on Milton's secret and suggests naming the extraterrestrial Harry. Sandy suggests to Milton that he should acknowledge the fact that Joyce is joining their group, even though he's ready to kill the overly curious lady. Then she shows pictures of cats that Jules has drawn for him. Joyce speculates that Jules is trying to communicate something to the old man since all the drawings are of cats. However, Milton refuses to believe it. Meanwhile, the government receives numerous calls about various anomalies. One day, a woman complains about a man who spends hours staring at his rocket in the yard. FBI agents go to the given address but find a homemade rocket and a happy man next to it. At the same time, Joyce visits Milton to spend time with the extraterrestrial. She also gives it a t-shirt and offers it apples. During this time, Sandy receives a call from a young man who was interested in her posters. He comes to her house and the joyful woman invites him for tea. While Joyce talks to the extraterrestrial about her life in the big city, where she even performed in concerts because she sang well, Sandy engages in conversation with the guest and Joyce suggests singing for the extraterrestrial. While she does that, the young man asks for permission to use Sandy's restroom, but when she follows him upstairs, she sees him stealing her jewelry. After she threatens to call the police, the man attacks her and tries to strangle her. However, the extraterrestrial has a vision of the events and telepathically makes the man's head explode. This raises suspicions at the FBI, who are conducting the search for the crashed spaceship. Responding to police questions, Sandy suddenly realizes who saved her from certain death and rushes to Milton's house. She hugs Jules and tearfully thanks him for saving her life. The retirees discuss the potential danger of the extraterrestrial, but conclude that it's only dangerous to bad people. Meanwhile, the FBI agents can't understand how and from what the head of the criminal could have burst, so they decide to keep an eye on Sandy. On this day, Denise meets the elderly folks at the store and again brings up the topic of the apples Milton bought. However, Milton avoids the conversation. Later, the group has lunch at Milton's house when Sandy notices a strange smell. When they go outside, they discover a dead cat that Jules apparently brought there. Connecting all the facts, the retirees realize that the extraterrestrial needs cats for some reason, and now there are not 7, as in the picture, but 6. Milton calls Denise, hoping to find out where she disposes of the deceased cats in her clinic, which frightens her completely. Not receiving a clear answer, Milton and Sandy decide to drive around the streets of the town since cats often meet their fate under car wheels. On the road, Milton inquires about Sandy's husband's illness, which eventually led to his passing, and she talks about being left alone. She starts asking questions, reassuring that life must go on. However, at this point, Milton asks her to stop the car, and the FBI agents become witnesses as the elderly couple loads a deceased cat into the trunk. That day, they find 2 more cats, and Joyce promises to find the rest. Meanwhile, FBI agents eavesdrop on the private conversations of Milton's close ones and hear Denise telling her brother about her father's eccentricities. At this moment, Joyce brings 3 more cats she found in different parts of the town. Only one is missing. Just then, agents knock on the door, but the elderly folks hide and don't open it. The men eventually leave, and the people realize they need to act quickly. And then, Milton remembers Joyce's deaf, blind, and non-mobile cat. Offended, she leaves, but Sandy catches up with her and apologizes for Milton's bluntness. Joyce admits that he's right. It's long past time to end the suffering of the cat. She brings the animal, and the extraterrestrial puts it to eternal sleep. Then it covers the remains with some material, and they start to merge into a single object. In the end, a glowing object appears in front of the group, which serves as fuel for Jules's spaceship. The saucer lifts off into the air and moves to the center of the yard, which is instantly detected by the FBI's instruments. The retirees understand that the time for farewell has come. Joyce gives Jules a souvenir globe with a view of the city inside. Sandy gives him a sweater she knitted, and Milton gives him his driver's license with a photo. But the extraterrestrial suddenly makes an inviting gesture, clearly offering them to join, and Milton suddenly decides to accept the invitation. But then the phone rings in the house, and picking up the receiver he hears Denise's voice. She suggests meeting on Saturday. They'll have lunch and then she'll give him a haircut because they've been arguing, and that's not right. At that moment, agents knock on the door, Milton rushes into the yard, and they only manage to see the departing saucer, where 3 Earthlings joined in the last moment. The ship lands not far from the town to safely disembark the elderly and bid them a peaceful farewell. Milton hugs the extraterrestrial and thanks it for the invitation to travel together, but he can't leave his home and loved ones behind. Jules enters the spaceship and flies away while the elderly folks wave goodbye to him. Time passes. Milton continues to live in his home, visited by Sandy and Joyce. The elderly often reminisce about Jules' Harry and hope that he hasn't forgotten them either. And one night, Milton's yard is illuminated by a bright light, and the old man realizes that he has guests. A light, heartwarming, and slightly melancholic film about the fading of human life. It's good that amid the plethora of recently produced nonsense, there are still such heartfelt and warm movies in which an extraterrestrial is not a villain who came to Earth to conquer it, but rather a cute and understanding silent being with expressive eyes. People often fantasize about immortality, but what if a person could live for a few hundred years or thousands? What would an immortal look like? What would they do? How would they relate to family and religion? In 2007, director Richard Shankman attempted to explore these questions in the science fiction film The Man from Earth, and this fiction makes us contemplate the real. That's the case with John. There's a grave disorder. Is he serious? He is. The film begins with scenes of a 35-year-old man loading his belongings into the open bed of a pickup truck. 2 cars approach his house. People step out of them. Dan, Sandy, Harry, and Edith. They are colleagues and friends of the main character, Professor John Oldman. They are puzzled. Why is he planning to leave and without saying goodbye? Dan jokes that he must be in a hurry to take over a chair at Stanford, and Harry shows a basket of food, regretting that they don't have enough time. Otherwise, they would have arranged something grand. Edith notices a painting near the car. She's in awe. It looks very much like a Van Gogh, but she's never seen it before. John says it's a gift from a friend. Edith is surprised. It looks like an authentic one. John invites his friends into the house. They ask him to tell the truth. Why is he leaving his home and 10 years of teaching? John responds that he can't stay in one place for long. But his friends don't believe it. It can be that he moves so frequently. He's only 35 and he hasn't aged a bit in the last 10 years. Any woman on the faculty would give anything to know the secret. At that moment, Professor of Archaeology Art Jenkins arrives with his student, Linda. He gives John a book about prehistoric caves as a memento and also wonders where John is heading. Again, John says that he just enjoys moving around and brings out an expensive bottle of whiskey. People become more cheerful and forget about the uncomfortable questions. They form a circle and wish him a long life and good luck. On the shelf, Dan finds a strange bone artifact. It's a flint knife, a silicon tool for carving wood and bone. The Cro-Magnons used it in the Paleolithic era. While the group examines the artifact, John suddenly asks, what do they think an upper Paleolithic human would look like if they could have lived to the present time? Dan replies that, as Art's book says, he could be just like any of them, and if he had lived for centuries, he would have changed with each passing century, meaning that the upper Paleolithic people had the same intelligence as modern humans, they just knew less. Linda is curious. According to the biologist, what would sustain his life? Biologist Harry says that it would require complete cell regeneration. It is believed that the human body is designed for a lifespan of around 190 years. Edith laments, as many would love to know the secret of eternal life. Harry responds that what is magic for one time is science for another. After all, Columbus and Copernicus were once considered mad. And then John reveals that he could have traveled with Columbus, but he isn't the adventurous type. Moreover, he was already convinced that Earth was round. However, back then he still believed that there was an edge somewhere that one could fall off. The friends give uncertain smiles, thinking it's a joke, right? But John denies it. Every 10 years or so, people start to notice that he doesn't age and he has to leave. The friends are puzzled. Is he saying he's a Cro-Magnon? John explains that at least for the last 4,000 years, since the time of Mesopotamia, he's been sure of it. In his first life, he lived to about 35 years old and became the leader of his tribe because they believed he was a sorcerer. He didn't even have to fight for it. But then fear arose and they banished him. People believed he was stealing their life force to remain young. He was pursued because he wouldn't die. That's how the habit of joining new tribes he encountered along the way emerged. At first, John thought something was wrong with him. Maybe he was evil and that's why he couldn't die. Then he thought he might be cursed, or on the contrary, blessed. Later, he believed there was some purpose to his existence, and now he thinks he simply came into being. His friends are intrigued. John's story is full of interest. Edith is curious again about the fate of the Van Gogh painting, and John tells them that Van Gogh gave him the painting when John was Jacques Born, a pig farmer. Van Gogh used to visit him, paint, and talk about how nature finds its reflection in art. Art asks, "Did you always leave?" John shrugs. Sometimes he created a new identity for the next 10 years. Sometimes he even posed as his own son. But a few times he got caught. He even spent a year in a Belgian prison in 1862 for forging state documents. His friends start to get annoyed. John seems to have an answer to everything except one. Why does he do it? And he answers, he just wanted them to say goodbye to him specifically. After this, those around him conclude that John has serious issues. He remembers about moving. He still needs to take the boxes. While the man is carrying his belongings, Harry tries to find hidden microphones or cameras. People just can't believe that what is happening is real. At the car, Sandy confesses her love to John. He says that she's not indifferent to him either. But now she understands what she's getting into, right? Because one day he'll be forced to leave. He cannot give her eternity. But she objects. What is eternity, and who has it? Her parents divorced even before she was born. Besides, there's death, illness, insurmountable circumstances. Nobody knows how much time they have, whether it's a lot or little. She loves him and will accept everything he can give her. John and Sandy return to the house. Their friends say that they still have more questions. For example, does he remember any of his native languages? The man replies that he remembers a little. Besides, they haven't changed much. And did he engage in cave painting? Yes, he knew a man named Daru who was excellent at his work. He painted animals that hunters hoped to kill and eat. Once, after an unsuccessful hunt, the leader knocked out all his teeth for failing with his magic. After that, someone had to chew his food for him. Eventually, he developed jawbone inflammation and they abandoned him. Then John headed east. It was at the beginning of the Bronze Age. He walked along trade routes and learned the languages of the places he visited. Everywhere there were myths about the creation of the world and new gods. He was a Sumerian for 2,000 years, then a Babylonian during Hammurabi's reign. For some time he sailed as a Phoenician. It seems he spent his whole life on the road and learned a few new tricks. He even staged his own death a couple of times. He made it to India and met Buddha, the most remarkable person he had ever encountered. Buddha taught John many things he had never pondered before. In the midst of the debate, Dr. Will Gruber arrives. The doctor says that there's absolutely no way for John to prove the truth of his story, and no way they could verify it. He's either their friend, or a caveman, or a liar, or a lunatic. The doctor is curious. In this extensive life being discussed, did he ever get sick? John answers affirmatively. Like everyone else, he had serious illnesses, perhaps pneumonia or other lung infections. He suffered from typhoid, yellow fever, and smallpox. He survived the bubonic plague, and it's even more horrifying than history tells. But he doesn't have any scars. Among the friends, a debate flares up, whether to believe John's stories or not. They contradict all their notions about nature. Dan is puzzled. A person with John's intellect would have studied a lot of things. John confesses he has 10 scientific degrees, including all those his friends have. He earned his biology doctorate at Oxford in 1840, but his achievements are just an excess of time, not brilliance. Suddenly, Dr. Will pulls out a gun. He asks John if he would survive if he is shot, but John never claimed he was immortal, just very old. The doctor is curious. What does John think about death? Is he afraid of it? John explains that ancient people thought about death, but they had a practical understanding. They stopped moving, fell, and never got up. Infections were incomprehensible. Aging was the biggest mystery. So at first, John thought that everyone around him was wrong. After all, they aged and died. And again, the friends ask, what is it like for a person when everyone they knew has died? The doctor asks John about his parents, but he says he only remembers glimpses. The doctor remarks that it's not surprising. He too remembers his father very vaguely. Will starts reasoning about what's fair and what's not. They will all die and he will keep on living. If that's true, it's not surprising that they might feel envy and even hatred. He accuses John. The others are outraged and try to stop the doctor, but he says that John is living an unjust life. Perhaps it's time for him to die. The doctor leaves, and then Harry informs everyone that Will's wife died yesterday, which is why he's so aggressive. John runs after his friend to apologize. Meanwhile, the others discuss John. The theory of illness comes up. John returns. The next question from his friends is whether there are others like him. The man admits that in the 17th century he met someone like him, and that person told him everything, confirming that he was just like John, but from a different time and place. They talked for 2 days and then parted ways. Edith asks if he believes in God. The friends become engaged as religious questions are close to everyone. Did he meet anyone from the Bible? Was he a part of religious history? Numerous theories are suggested. Edith is outraged, considering it blasphemy. John recounts that he once encountered Buddha and he liked what he heard. He had been contemplating the teachings for 500 years. Then he became Etruscan and infiltrated the Roman Empire. He didn't like how it turned into a massive killing machine. He went to the Middle East, thinking of passing on Buddha's teachings in a renewed form. He tried, but he was one dissident against Rome. Rome won, and the rest is well known. So John was Jesus? Yes, during the crucifixion he blocked the pain. He learned this technique in Tibet. He also slowed down bodily processes so much that they couldn't be detected. Everyone thought he died. They took him down from the cross and laid him in a cave. When he regained consciousness, he wanted to leave unnoticed, but a bunch of fanatics wouldn't let him do that. So he resurrected and headed to Central Europe. He can't prove it, he has no scars, and besides, they tied him down. But blood and nails look more convincing on icons. Edith is outraged. John deeply hurt her feelings. The friends start discussing religious questions. John says that he preached that Christ's teachings were about tolerance, brotherhood, and love. Life is here on earth, here and now. But then the talking serpent persuaded a woman to eat the apple, and everything went awry. Heaven and hell became tools for priests to rule with reward and punishment, trying to save souls that people never lost. John observes rituals, ceremonies, processions, genuflections, the moans of singers and choirs, and he thinks this is not what he meant. At this time, Dr. Will returns. The debates about religion, Christianity, and piety continue. The friends racked their brains. Was it the fabrication, a mental disorder, drugs? But they can't find a solution. John completely baffled the 4 scientists. He continues to explain that religion is not what is happening now. The church grew out of fairy tales. Even the name Jesus grew out of John. He never claimed to be the Son of God. He wanted to share knowledge. He did not walk on water or resurrect the dead. The friends gather to leave, although they are excited by his story. Edith pleads again to say that he's not Jesus, and she starts crying. The lights come on. Will demands that he admit that it was all a joke, and then John confesses that it was just a story. Their outrage knows no bounds, but John says that they themselves pushed him to this thought. They said he doesn't age. Edith saw Van Gogh, then found the chisel. They themselves bought into his game, and he couldn't resist seeing how they would react to his words. After all, he had such a splendid audience: an anthropologist, an archaeologist, an expert in Christianity, a psychologist, and a biologist. Linda, standing in the doorway, asks if the name Oldman is a play on words, old man. The infuriated people leave except for Will. He stays in the room, and John sees his friends off. Sandy asks, what other telltale names did he come up with for himself? And John starts listing: John Political, John Hermit, and about 60 years ago, when he was teaching at Harvard, he was John Thomas Party. Will's voice is heard. Wait, 60 years ago? John Party? John turns to him and says that his mother's name was Nola. Will initially denies every word, but in tears he confirms Nola was his mum. But he can't believe it, and he asks for the name of their dog. John names it Woofy, and he asks if she got married again. Will says he feels cold, and John pities the old man. He was always cold. Will tries to touch his face. His father had a beard, and John confirms that he always checked if it was real. Will collapses. An ambulance and police car arrive at the house. They carry Will's body on a stretcher, covering it with a sheet over his head. Everyone leaves. Sandy asks if he has seen his adult child die before. John shakes his head. He gets into the car and drives away from the house. Sandy looks at him. The car stops at the bend. Smiling, she walks towards it. The Man from Earth is a very ambiguous movie. However, it makes you wonder. It raises very complex questions about morality, ethics, and religion. It is fascinating to follow the flight of human thought and to think, what if? "2157. A voiceover narrates, Earth has forgotten about wars and famine. Nature has revived. Medicine has conquered deadly diseases. Humanity is exploring unknown planets, entrusting the search for extraterrestrial life in deep space to students full of strength, courage, and a belief in goodness. A young man named Max embarks on another flight. Suddenly, his spacecraft is damaged by an asteroid and makes an emergency landing on an unknown planet. Max steps outside, and immediately his shuttle explodes, leaving him without communication. But he doesn't despair, and first of all, decides to explore. By all parameters, the planet resembles Earth, and the astronaut hopes to find help and maybe a communication system here. But an indigenous inhabitant captures him in the forest. To understand the language of this planet, Max inserts a translator capsule into his ear. The indigenous person, named Zeph, turns Max over to the authorities. They put a helmet on Max that can project a person's thoughts and memories onto a screen and begin the interrogation. At the same time, in a nearby room, Corporal Gaius is assigned to transport Max to the capital as a subconvoy. Here, Max senses a strange signal, and everyone around starts chanting the anthem of the guard. Later, they pass by a strange tower, which, according to Gaius, serves to protect against enemies. Suddenly, its base explodes, and the structure collapses onto the road. Gaius is trapped inside the car, but Max pulls the corporal out. It turns out that this act was carried out by the rebels, the main enemies of the supreme authority of the state. The two men reach the capital on foot. Meanwhile, the head of the Department of Special Research, known as the Wanderer, summons his subordinate named Fank and instructs him to deliver Max to the department. Fank takes Max away, while the Republic's prosecutor reports that the Wanderer has taken in a strange savage and instructs gathering all available information about it. Then it's time to activate the towers, and everyone prepares in their own way. The prosecutor enters the bathroom and clamps a special stick between his teeth. Meanwhile, Fank has a seizure, and while soldiers assist him, Max manages to escape from the vehicle. The shocked young man walks through the city, marveling at the unfamiliar and incomprehensible life. Meanwhile, the unknown fathers gather for a meeting, as they call the rulers of this planet. After a long walk, Max enters a local cafe where he stands up for a waitress who was insulted by one of the patrons. The grateful girl introduces herself as Rada. It turns out that she is the sister of Corporal Gaius. While escorting her home, Max gets into a brawl with a street gang and defeats them. Impressed, Rada takes him to her place. Later, Gaius returns home. Max starts asking questions about the workings of their world and quickly realizes that Rada and Gaius's minds are poisoned by propaganda and false information. Rada is convinced that their planet is hollow and there is no such thing as the sky or space. Meanwhile, Gaius educates his new friend about the political structure of their state, known as Saraksh. The Unknown Fathers are the saviors of the homeland who have stopped wars with the help of defense towers that protect the country from attacks. Nobody knows the Unknown Fathers' true identities because they are not rulers, but public servants. At Max's request, Corporal recommends him for the guard. Max demonstrates a high level of training, which surprises Gaius. The two men often argue about politics, and one day Gaius admits that neighboring states hate Saraksh because they were once a single state united by a common history. Gradually, romantic feelings develop between Max and Rada. They go for walks often and Max tells her about his home planet, Earth, and regrets that his parents believe he is dead. Soon, Max is tasked with catching rebels, whom they identify by their regular seizures reminiscent of epileptic fits. One of the rebels attacks the captain, and Max saves his life, after which the captain suddenly regrets catching them, as they are also human beings. Max reveals that he considered them something like savages. Later, Max attends interrogations and sees that the rebels are not terrorists, as the Unknown Fathers label them, but ordinary people with their ideals and beliefs. Max cannot come to terms with the cruelty of the interrogations and simply cannot believe that someone is paying the rebels to hate the government. Meanwhile, Fank reports to the Wanderer that he has found the savage, while Gaius and Max are summoned to the captain of the guard, who orders Max to execute the arrested rebels. Max leads the condemned to the execution site in the forest, but soon he returns to the commanding officer, drops his gear and weapons, as he has released the arrested rebels and walks away. Max begins to speak about the real and just order of the world that exists on Earth. In response, the captain shoots Max, and Gaius is ordered to write a report about the transfer. Meanwhile, the Unknown Fathers are discussing an attack on neighboring states. The prosecutor advocates for starting a war, and the Chief Father orders them to come up with a pretext, such as an attack on a tower. During this time, Max's body is recovered by the rebels. Among them is a doctor who is astonished because, according to all the rules, Max should have died. He reveals that the Unknown Fathers are a group of conspirators who have seized power and eliminated dissenters, thus diverting the population's attention from poverty and corruption. The towers are transmitters of special radiation that hypnotizes the impoverished people, although most of them do not notice it. The minority, which includes the rebels, experiences excruciating pain. The transmitters are activated twice a day across the country, causing people to go insane and die. Max is recognized as one of their own and taken for an operation to sabotage the tower, organized by the prosecutor through a traitor. Amid gunfire, Max makes his way to the transmitter and detonates it. However, the rebel squad perishes. Max seeks refuge in Rada's apartment, where he reveals everything he has learned about the towers. Gaius does not believe this and suggests that Max should return to his home and take Rada with him. But at that moment, the guards storm the apartment and arrest the men. Max is incarcerated in a prison, where he is recognized by the indigenous Zeph, who is also a rebel. Max tells Zeph about the tower's destruction and the loss of the rebel squad. Meanwhile, the Wanderer asks the prosecutor to hand over Max to him. The prosecutor, however, requests in return to halt the development of more precise transmitters, as he fears that his secret will be revealed since his reaction to the radiation is similar to that of the rebels, meaning he is also a dissenter. Later, Max and other death row inmates are sent to clear the southern borders of the remaining war robots. During this time, the prosecutor learns that Max is immune to the emitters. He decides to break the agreement with the Wanderer and orders Max to be brought to him. The next day, Max attempts to convey to the rebels the idea that they should not destroy the towers one by one but strike at the center, where the signal originates. Zeph becomes furious and explains that the towers are not for identifying dissenters. They are active continuously, not just twice a day. The radiation from the towers robs people of their ability to think critically. However, it makes them believe everything that newspapers, radio, teachers, and preachers say. People can be made to believe anything. Only the rebels understand this, as the radiation does not hypnotize them, but only inflicts agonizing pain. Zeph continues. There are mutants in the south who are also unaffected by the radiation. However, they have no dealings with humans. Just then, they hear the roar of an engine, and Zeph identifies it as a self-propelled tank, trying to kill them. Max sprints to the tank, climbs inside, and disables the automatic control system. He then informs his friends that he is heading south to find allies and destroy the towers. At the border, the military attempts to stop the tank, and among them, Max recognizes Gaius. Taking him captive, Max breaks through the barricades. On the way, Max tells Gaius about the true situation on this planet, and Gaius becomes convinced of his accuracy when, at the designated time, he is outside the tower's range and does not feel the radiation. Gaius gets angry upon realizing that he has been a puppet of the government all this time, but Max tries to calm him down and reminds him that there are 40 million people like him, and it is for them that he initiated this rebellion. During a stop, residents of the steppes, referred to as mutants, appear near the tank. They behave peacefully and offer food to the travelers. The guys proceed to the ruler of these lands, noting the poverty and destitution of the population. They are told that it is dangerous to live here after the last war, but these people are outcasts with nowhere else to go. Max suggests to their leader, the Duke, to start a rebellion against the unknown fathers, but the mutants are physically and morally too weak to help in the uprising. The mutants propose that the guys seek help from the island empire. However, to do that, they must pass through contaminated lands. So the Duke gifts them an old bomber and the guys take to the sky. During the flight, the bomber is exposed to the radiation from the towers, and Gaius becomes fanatically devoted to Max, obstructing him from piloting. Max struggles to maintain control, and the bomber collides with a tower. Gaius suddenly snaps out of his fanatic state with no recollection of what he had just done. However, their aircraft is shot down by the automated anti-aircraft defense system left over from the previous war. The downed bomber crashes into the sea, but Max and Gaius manage to escape and reach the shore. On the shore, they discover an abandoned submarine, and Max decides to go inside. At the same time, in the city, the prosecutor orders Rada to be brought to him, and his men snatch her off the street. He claims to be Max's friend and shows Rada a recording of his escape. However, she doesn't believe him and refuses to assist the prosecutor in his search for her beloved. Rada is thrown into prison. Meanwhile, Gaius, impatiently waiting for his friend, swims to the submarine where they discover evidence of horrifying experiments conducted on prisoners. The guys reach the control room and view video recordings of mass executions of Gaius's fellow countrymen by the representatives of the island empire whom they were seeking help from. Gaius is horrified by the fact that these monsters could invade his country. It becomes evident that forming an alliance with the empire is not an option. The guys return to the shore, where they are met by a coastal patrol. It turns out that a war has broken out with a neighboring state, and like most of the prisoners, they will be sent to the front. Meanwhile, the Wanderer, desiring to lure Max into his department, engineers Rada's escape. He laments how the war has disrupted all his plans and assigns Fank the task of finding and bringing Max back, confessing that he is afraid of him. At the same time, Max and Gaius are dispatched to the front, where they reunite with Zeph. Their commander turns out to be the captain of the guard, who refuses to hand over the Earthling to the arriving Fank. The guys are sent into battle on old tanks when Fank finally locates Max. However, Max refuses to leave his friends and stuns the officer, tossing him into their tank. The battle commences, but Max directs his vehicle to the other side of the battlefield. Gaius blindly obeys him, influenced by the radiation, and pulls their unconscious friends out, which the captain witnesses. Gaius offers his body as a shield when the captain prepares to execute Max for desertion, but the wounded Max gathers his last strength and kills the commander. Max mourns his friend, but, upon hearing Rada's name from the now conscious Fank, agrees to cooperate with the Wanderer. After the battle ends, Max buries Gaius while listening to Fank's proposals. He will have an apartment on the Institute's premises, his car, and freedom of movement. But he will only see Rada once he proves his loyalty to the state. Meanwhile, the prosecutor heads to the Wanderer's department, where he deceitfully meets with Max. He proposes that Max overthrow the unknown fathers by providing the coordinates of the center that controls the tower system. Upon infiltrating the center, Max must activate special radiation, causing waves of depression, which will subdue all the people in the country, including the military. Then, Max must eliminate the unknown fathers. Afterward, he will become the ruler of the state and free Rada, who's in the Wanderer's hands. The prosecutor will serve as his advisor. Max takes Zeph with him and embarks on the mission. He arrives at the center and issues orders to his associates, instructing them to detonate the bomb in the trunk if he does not return. He easily gains access to the interior, but is halted by guards just before reaching the elevator. Max incapacitates them, but the men regain consciousness and pursue him. Max reaches the control center and activates the depression mode throughout the country. The Wanderer watches as people fall to the ground and rushes toward the control center. Meanwhile, Max returns to retrieve the bomb, places it inside the building, and triggers it. Then, he leaves the site of the impending explosion. The Wanderer initiates a pursuit of Max and, catching up with him, engages in a confrontation. At that moment, a powerful explosion resounds, destroying the main transmitter. People on the streets begin to regain their senses and sobriety as Max rushes to find Rada and locates her in a cryo chamber. He carries the girl outside, but the Wanderer blocks his path. It is then revealed that he is, in fact, an employee of Galactic Security from Earth who arrived on the planet 20 years ago to assist it. Now, chaos erupts on the streets, leading to a power struggle in which many people will perish. In his rage, the Wanderer beats up a foolish student who destroyed the fruits of his labor. Forgetting about economics and inflation, the state faces famine and invasion from neighboring countries. Max starts to resist and, in turn, accuses the Wanderer of allowing the construction of the towers and the enslavement of the local population. However, the Wanderer reminds him of the laws of history, where all rational beings go through the experience of wars and enslavement. This planet is no exception. It is at this point that Max declares that he is now home. As long as he is alive, he will fight against inflation, hunger, and wars, and will not allow the establishment of yet another society based on slavery. Rada comes to Max, and as they stand together, the Wanderer smiles.
You, sir, are a scholar and a gentleman.
One beautiful day, an ordinary family is celebrating a child's birthday. Dad is grilling barbecue, Mom is chatting with friends, while the kids are amazed by a cowboy's lasso-throwing skills. Later, the children go to eat cake, and Cooper's daughter suddenly freezes, staring at the horizon. The man turns around and sees a huge nuclear mushroom cloud rising over the city. The next minute, the blast wave reaches their home. The owner hides his family in a shelter, while Cooper and his daughter jump on a horse and ride away as nuclear mushrooms rise behind him. 219 years have passed. Lucy is a young woman who possesses many skills and lives in shelter number 33 with her father and brother Norman. Unfortunately, it's impossible to find a man who wouldn't be related to her. Therefore, the council decides to allow her to take a husband from another colony. The happy girl puts on the communal wedding dress, while her neighbors, led by her father, the shelter's warden, prepare tables for the wedding, displayed in a field surrounded by a 3D image of distant mountains. The father is happy for his daughter, regretting that her mother didn't live to see her wedding. Then comes the moment when people head to the portal, guarded by the gatekeeper Chad, Lucy's cousin. He has long loved the girl but must admit the fairness of genetic ethics. The young man presses a button. The portal opens, letting in a delegation from a neighboring colony. Their leader reminds that for fresh blood, they must receive seeds and spare parts for machinery, and a young man is brought to Lucy. Their marriage is registered, and everyone sits at the tables. The shelter's residents notice that the guests are rather uncouth but decide not to focus on this. Lucy's father delivers a speech, hoping that the next generation might finally live on the surface. People dance and enjoy themselves, much to Norman's displeasure. The groom asks the girl to show him the bedroom, and she leads him to the room. The young couple begins to perform their duties while Norman patrols the colony and suddenly finds the body of one of the colonists. And Lucy unexpectedly hears a distant scream. She puts on a universal bracelet, which instantly shows that her young husband is infected with radiation, indicating he came from the surface. Realizing he's been found out, he lunges at her and throws her against the wall. Dazed, the girl watches as the guy takes a knife and prepares to kill her. Lucy remembers her skills and tries to take the knife, but the man stabs her in the side. At that moment, an alarm sounds. The man gets distracted, and Lucy knocks him out with a vase hit to the head, then administers first aid to herself and rushes to the armory, where she finds a pistol and hurries to the room where her fellow tribesmen remained. She kills an alien she encounters, but upon leaving the room, she witnesses a real battle. Lucy manages to save Norman when her unmade husband appears, but her father drowns the son-in-law in a barrel of water and rushes to a signal about a breach in the doors. Lucy runs after him and freezes in front of a team of aliens who have taken the shelter's residents hostage. The attacker's leader offers the man a choice: his fellow tribesmen or Lucy. As the girl tries to understand what this means, her father locks her in a compartment, after which his captors take him with them from the surface when an explosion destroys the gates. Meanwhile, on the surface of the Earth, in the Brotherhood of Steel barracks, young men are beating one of them, Paladin Maximus. His friend helps the guy recover and leads him to classes where they are taught useful wasteland skills, as soon they will serve as knights. They are seekers and guardians and must be able to distinguish ancient artifacts. At this time, to the Paladin's great admiration, Steel Knights arrive at the base. Later, the friend leads Maximus to a hangar where their armor is stored to look at them. Later, Maximus hears cries of jubilation and finds out that some of them were promoted. Among them is his friend, who will become the assistant to Knight Titus. But in the morning, the barracks are awakened by a wild scream. It turns out that someone put a blade in the future assistant's boot, and the girl severely injured her foot. Maximus is arrested and led to the Brotherhood's leader. In the shelter, order is being restored. Lucy is stitching up her stomach wound, and people gather for a council meeting. She requests that a squad be assembled and sent to the surface to search for her father. However, the council refuses to do this. Lucy then gathers the necessary items and heads to the gates, accompanied by her brother. Chad rushes to go with her, but she sedates him and says goodbye to Norman. The gates open and the girl steps onto the surface. She surveys the world of sand, where traces of the past tragedy still linger, and walks towards the sea. Maximus is accused of maiming a comrade out of envy, but he denies it. The leader realizes the boy is not guilty and appoints him as an assistant to the Steel Knight. The next day, the leader assigns the knights and their assistants the task of finding an escaped scientist who has stolen a very important object. Knight Titus and Maximus load up on a helicopter and fly to their designated sector. At the same time, a band of bounty hunters lures a wild ghoul from the grave to find this scientist heading to the witch Moldover, with whom the ghoul has old ties. Unexpectedly, the ghoul shoots the hunters and sets off on his own accord. Lucy travels across the surface and one day stops to camp near an abandoned house. She makes a fire and falls asleep by it. She awakens to strange sounds and sees a dog devouring a huge insect. A man sitting by her fire explains that the cockroaches not only survived the nuclear blasts, they mutated and are now very dangerous. He advises the girl to return to the shelter, as she does not know the rules of the outer world. But Lucy is obliged to find her father. The man leaves. Meanwhile, the Steel Knight and Maximus land in the right sector. Near their landing spot, the fugitive scientist and his dog hide in a cave. Sometime later, the knight and his assistant arrive there. Maximus immediately finds the sought-after scientist's tracks, and the knight heads into the cave. Maximus is also forced to go with him, though he has no armor. Inside, a giant mutant cave bear attacks them. The knight engages in combat, but the beast overpowers him, and Titus suddenly starts to run. Maximus barely manages to kill the huge beast. The knight turns out to be a weak man who blames and insults the boy. Then Maximus refuses to revive the wounded knight and lets him die, deciding to find the fugitive himself. He dons the armor himself and learns to use it. The boy is amazed at how his strength has increased and the boundless opportunities that have opened up before him. Incidentally, he saves a weakling, although it turns out that the person was not very good. He realizes that he needs to figure out who is worthy of protection first. Lucy reaches a town where she was advised to look for traces of her father's kidnappers. She enters one of the shops, where an elderly saleswoman, recognizing her as a shelter resident, advises the girl to leave this place. Shelters are underground havens where the rich hid while the world perished, so no one here will help her. The girl goes outside where the scientist with the dog approaches her again, surprised that she is still here. But then the saleswoman, who turns out to be waiting for him, calls out to him, and suddenly the ghoul appears, who has also come for the scientist. He intends to take him when the saleswoman promises money to anyone who helps protect the scientist. Then the ghoul shoots the scientist in the leg to prevent him from escaping and engages in battle with those who want the reward. The ghoul shoots everyone while Lucy sneaks into the shop, finds the order book, and learns the address of Moldover. She wants to leave, but sees how the ghoul injures the scientist's dog and hears his plea for help. She stands up for him and shoots the ghoul with a capsule, which only makes him laugh. Then a knight lands in front of the ghoul. Maximus asks the girl to look after the scientist while he fights the ghoul. She and the saleswoman take the injured scientist into the shop, where the woman attaches an iron leg to him and offers to accompany him to Moldover, giving her the coordinates. The pair leave while the ghoul fights the knight and quickly finds his weak spot. Maximus has not yet mastered all the advantages of the suit, which costs him losing his navigation ability. The Iron Knight is thrown far from the shop, and at that moment, the ghoul realizes that his target has escaped. Meanwhile, Lucy and the scientist stop to rest, and the girl watches in horror at the scientist's bloodied leg. She realizes they won't make it, and the man confirms this. He confesses that he will soon die, but she must definitely deliver his head to Moldover. He pulls out a saw and dies. Sometime later, the ghoul finds the headless body of the scientist amidst the sandy wasteland and follows the tracks of Lucy, who is carrying the head to Moldover. Soon the girl stops to rest and, after snacking, examines the head, wondering what is so special about it. Just in case, she inserts a tracking device into its nostril. Maximus examines the armor and finds a malfunction. Suddenly, he is called from the base, which surprises him. He reports the death of his assistant and is promised a replacement, though he vehemently opposes this. The boy heads to the nearest town, where he finds a workshop and, paying all the money he has, repairs the broken module. But when he returns to the suit, he discovers a gang of local marauders trying to dismantle the armor for scrap metal. He engages in a fight, but is hit hard in the face. The boy regains consciousness to see that the armor has been breached. He grabs a piece of metal lying nearby and uses it to destroy the attackers. Then he sees a helicopter arriving, dropping off a new assistant. The assistant turns out to be one of his tormentors from the training camp. Maximus manages to close the helmet, and the new assistant does not notice the substitution. Lucy reaches the place where Hollywood once stood. She stops by a pond when an unknown monster attacks her, snatching the backpack with the scientist's head and disappearing into the water. Lucy tries to track the thief but is caught in the ghoul's sights, to whom she explains what happened with the head. At this time, the Shelter Council conducts an investigation into Lucy's escape, after which Norman realizes that no one intends to search for either his father or sister. In the desert, Maximus torments the assistant with various misdeeds, avenging past humiliations, but the latter continues to serve the Steel Knight willingly. They find the ghoul's tracks with a special device, follow them, and find the headless body of the scientist. Meanwhile, the ghoul sets up a hunt for the underwater monster, using the girl as bait. Soon, the beast emerges onto the shore. It grabs Lucy, but the ghoul manages to pull her out. The girl barely manages to fend off the attack, but the underwater monster escapes, taking her boot. The enraged ghoul drags Lucy along. At this time, the Steel Knight's assistant fills the armor with water, talking about his life. Suddenly, Maximus asks him to talk about himself. The boy confesses that in fact he was a decent guy, and they beat him as part of the tradition like any other newbie. Now he regrets that Maximus didn't live to be called up for service. They move on and soon reach the pond. The pair enters the water and immediately sees the monster. Maximus demands the assistant to go ashore and takes on the fight himself, but the boy shoots at the creature and it chases after him. Maximus manages to pull the boy from the monster's jaws, and it dies, spitting out the scientist's head and Lucy's boot in its last act. Then a dog runs up to them, which continues on with them. The ghoul leads Lucy through the wasteland, denying her water, and soon they arrive at the place where a movie studio once stood, where actor Cooper and his wife worked. Soon they reach an abandoned clinic from which male screams can be heard. Entering, they find an old acquaintance of the ghoul, undergoing mutation and suffering because of it. The condition could be alleviated with special medication, but the ghoul doesn't have any, so the ghoul relieves the poor soul from his misery. The girl doesn't understand why he did it, but he explains they need something to eat. The girl mentions that they also had it tough but never ate their own kind. Then the ghoul forces Lucy to cut up the body to take this meat with them. They continue on, although it becomes increasingly difficult for the girl without water. Soon the ghoul stops in front of a structure where radioactive water has accumulated. Lucy can't resist and starts drinking it, earning her companion's approval. She is finally beginning to understand the life of the wasteland. He is her future, and it won't be long now. Then he coughs, and Lucy tries to use this moment to escape, but stops in front of a huge crater where she gets caught in his lasso. She tries to break free and accidentally bites off the ghoul's finger, for which he cuts off one of her fingers. Soon they reach an old supermarket where the ghoul offers the woman in exchange for the items he needs. Stunned, Lucy enters the building, not noticing that the ghoul falls into unconsciousness. Inside, she is greeted by a robot. It invites Lucy to follow and implants a new finger for her. Then it pities her and confesses it will just take her organs, and immediately sedates her. Later in the shelter, Norman is delivering food to the aliens captured during an attack, and one of them confesses that the inhabitants of shelter number 32, which they captured before this, were planning something very bad. Norman tries to access the network to find information about shelter number 32, but the data are classified. Together with Chad, they clear the debris and penetrate shelter number 32, where they find a devastated field in the desiccated corpses of the inhabitants. But if they were dead when the aliens arrived, it turns out they killed each other. Lucy wakes up and sees many women locked in glass cabinets, ready to be dissected for organs. The robot prepares to open her chest cavity, but cuts her bonds instead, and she wriggles out from under its saw and disables the robot. Then she fills syringes with drain cleaner, reprograms the robot, and in its company, goes to the owners of the dreadful place. She forces them to release the prisoners, and people flee. But not all. Lucy forces the opening of the last cages. The owners comply, and out come zombies, who immediately tear apart two organ traders. Lucy surveys the battlefield in horror as the last zombie prepares to attack her, but she finds a pistol in her hand. Norman and Chad continue their inspection of the neighboring shelter and learn that its door was open from the outside with a key bearing the name of Norman and Lucy's mother. And Lucy finds medicine to sustain the ghoul's life, and despite the torture she endured, she hands the medication to the ghoul. Maybe she will look like him on the outside, but inside, she will never be like him. The girl leaves, and the ghoul goes into the shattered store and takes the necessary meds to bring himself to a relative semblance of order. Then he stuffs his hat with medicines, but then he notices a video recorder, puts in an old tape where Cooper plays a cowboy, and sits down in front of the television. Maximus and his assistant settle down to rest. Thaddeus cannot contain his delight at being rescued, as knights rarely treat their assistants kindly. He asks to be branded. Maximus obliges and lifts his helmet. However, upon recognizing him, the assistant attacks, resulting in Maximus breaking his leg. But Thaddeus manages to extract a nuclear core from the armor, immobilizing the exoskeleton, and leaves, taking the scientist's head with him. Giant cockroaches immediately attack the immobilized suit. Maximus, terrified, awaits his death when the insects scatter from gunfire, and Lucy approaches the knight. She explains why she needs the scientist's head and helps the man out of the suit, and he gives her medication for radiation sickness. When Lucy recovers, she suggests they go after the head together, since she has a tracker. They will hand it over to the Brotherhood, in return for which the knights will help her find her father. Maximus agrees. At the same time, in Shelter 33, instead of her father, Betty is elected as the warden. Norman dislikes this and studies the history of the shelter. Suddenly, he realizes that all caretakers were selected from the residents of Shelter 31. Lucy and Maximus reach a bridge where they are stopped by a pair of vagrants. They pretend to be scared and ask for permission to pass. The couple, raising their hands, tries to walk away. However, the suspicious Maximus manages to shoot first, saving their lives, though he injures his hand, and Lucy realizes how naive the shelter's residents are. Soon they reach a billboard of the New Californian Republic. The girl is upset because they live with the belief that they are meant to revive America, but it turns out everything has already happened on the surface. Maximus reassures her, as there is no republic anyway. Soon they arrive at a huge crater in the middle of the city. The boy confesses that he survived this hell by hiding in a refrigerator, but then Lucy realizes that Maximus's wound is much more serious and leads him to a building with a clinic sign. Maximus lags behind, and when he enters, the girl is nowhere to be found. He searches for her and enters a chamber between two doors. The space fills with gas, causing the boy to lose consciousness. Betty leads her people to Shelter 32 to announce a partial relocation, as these resources are too valuable. Chad and Norman are surprised to see that the bodies have been removed and all traces of the tragedy have disappeared. Norman inquires about the whereabouts of his mother's key after her death. Betty confesses that they buried the woman with it. Maximus and Lucy come to in the shelter on stretchers. Maximus receives medical care. The shelter leader asks the couple to stay, as the boy needs treatment. Moreover, the suppliers have found armor and will soon deliver it here. Lucy thanks them for the refuge, and the leader informs her that she was born on the surface like many of them. The couple spends several hours in quarantine. From the conversation, it turns out that Maximus never knew a woman's love. Lucy is ready to teach him this art, as it is considered natural in the shelter, but the boy is embarrassed. Moreover, it is not customary among knights. Later, they go to lunch, where they suddenly notice that many of the surrounding people have various physical deformities. The caretaker turns out to be a cyclops. For Lucy, this is strange, but Maximus does not understand her concern. Later, the caretaker confesses to Lucy that they accept people from the surface, which surprises the girl since this was strictly forbidden in her shelter. But when she asks about the forbidden level they were advised not to visit, the caretaker immediately ends the conversation. Maximus finds a room where a nuclear block is installed, powering the entire underground. The leader hands him an electronic key to his personal compartment and suggests he rest a bit. The boy enters, and upon entering, he is amazed to see a basket filled with various delicacies and things he has never seen before. For the first time in his life, he takes a real shower, puts on a robe and slippers, and indulges in unknown products. Meanwhile, Lucy finds a room where the entire history of the Californian Republic is vividly described. It turns out that life here was revived in 2142 but was destroyed in 2277. Lucy is horrified, wondering who needed a new war and why. But then all the shelter inhabitants hear a sound signal and head to the designated place. Meanwhile, a ghoul is caught by the so-called new president of the territory, who owned a supermarket trading in organs, and the ghoul is blamed for its destruction. However, he calmly asks for a needle and thread to sew his finger back on and asks for directions to find Moldover. But the president orders the ghoul to be killed. The ghoul has to destroy the new law enforcers and search for the woman himself. Lucy comes with everyone to a room, in the center of which stands an altar with burning candles. People begin to sing something, moving their hands, and Lucy gradually falls into a trance, supporting the others. Unexpectedly, people start to undress, which shocks Lucy. A bowl goes around, from which everyone takes some powder and smears their faces, and suddenly Lucy realizes with horror that it is the ashes of the deceased. In another bowl there is blood. People call to the Mother of Flame, who must save them, and an image of Moldover unfolds above their heads. A frightened Lucy runs to Maximus and urges him to run away quickly, but the boy has just found himself in such paradisiacal conditions and does not want to leave. So Lucy heads to the forbidden level. She enters a laboratory where apparently some genetic experiments on people were conducted. The girl is horrified as she examines the gruesome exhibits and notices glass cryocapsules containing human bodies. But then the lights turn on and a man in a white coat enters. Lucy hides, but he hears a noise, follows it, and finds the girl. Lucy fights, but the men who arrive seize her and drag her to the upper level. Meanwhile, the ghoul arrives at the digger's house, whose eldest son knows the location of Moldover. The frightened man orders the boy to tell everything he knows, and he admits that the woman can be found at the observatory. But when the ghoul is about to leave, the boy tries to kill him and pays with his life for it. At the same time, the shelter leaders shame Lucy as they had given her refuge, fed her, and healed her friend, but the girl is furious because she has seen what they do to people. Then they show her the complete recording of the attack on the laboratory of the very monster that almost devoured her too. It was the first inhabitants of the shelter who experimented on people, turning them into monsters. They are only trying to alleviate the pain of those who survived. The fact is that each shelter specializes in some experiment, and Lucy just doesn't know this. Nevertheless, she must be punished for her disobedience. The girl is led away, which Maximus sees. Thaddeus makes a stop to rest and realizes that his leg is in very bad condition. A dog bothers him, and he locks it in a metal box, then sets off to find a radio tower to contact the Brotherhood. At this time, the inhabitants of the shelter sentence Lucy to exile to the surface. Moreover, they supply her with a stock of food. The girl is stunned, as this is exactly what she wanted. Nevertheless, in her last words, she asks them to allow her friend to stay. But then Maximus appears in knight's armor, into which he has inserted the nuclear block he just stole. He scatters the men when the girl stops him, as they are letting her go anyway. They go up to the surface, and learning that he stole the nuclear block, Lucy convinces him to return it, as the shelter cannot survive without energy. They drop the block down, and Lucy, moved, calls him a good person. Then he confesses that he allowed a knight to perish and took his armor, so he is not a good person at all, but he really wants to go with her. Thaddeus is caught up by a man who calls himself a doctor and promises to fix his leg. He takes the boy to an abandoned clinic where, in exchange for a nuclear block, he gives him a potion that, when drunk, Thaddeus ecstatically sees his leg heal. Meanwhile, the ghoul finds the locked dog that Thaddeus left behind, and it leads him on Thaddeus's trail. At the same time, the boy reaches the radio station, around which traps are set that tear those who come too close to pieces. Thaddeus sends a signal to the Brotherhood and, waiting for their arrival, chats with the radio station owner about music. Then Maximus and Lucy appear. The girl asks for the scientist's head, the boy accidentally steps on a trap and an arrow pierces his neck. But strangely, he does not think of dying, and then Maximus realizes that he has become a zombie. Thaddeus is upset. He should not have trusted the unfamiliar doctor, but now the path to the Brotherhood is closed for him, as they would kill him immediately. At that moment, copters appear on the horizon. Maximus suggests to Titus to give him the scientist's head and run, and the boy takes this opportunity. Then Maximus gives the head to Lucy and picks up a head of some unfortunate lying nearby, torn apart in a trap. He asks the girl to run, and she kisses him and promises to wait in shelter 33. Some inhabitants of shelter number 33 begin to receive notifications about relocation to the neighboring block. Seizing the opportunity, Norman enters the caretaker system, deceitfully gains access to Shelter 31, and heads there. The arriving servants take Maximus and bring him to the camp. The boy hands over the head he obtained to the leader and confesses that his knight perished. After finding nothing in the head, they sentence him to death. And then his friend confesses that she had cut her own leg because she was scared to go searching. Maximus shouts that he knows where to find the real head. The leader orders him to be released, and everyone prepares for a performance. At that time, Lucy reaches the observatory where her father is sitting in a cage. Sitting at the table, Moldaver greets the girl, who is horrified to see a dried-up, yet still living mummy seated next to the hostess. The girl is willing to give her the head in exchange for freedom. Moldaver extracts a vial from the head and offers to listen to the real story of her father. Although he begs his daughter not to listen, the woman begins her story. Meanwhile, Norman finds a robot with a human brain in the secret Shelter 31, which immediately tries to inject him with something. The boy barely dodges the crazy machine. Moldaver's story transports Lucy to the distant pre-war years when actor Cooper, agitated by his wife's talks of an impending nuclear war, decides to follow her. He comes to her work and listens to a corporate council meeting through a bug he planted on his wife. Billionaires discuss the decline in sales worldwide. Then they move on to the topic of shelters. Someone does not understand their necessity, arguing that if anyone survives on the surface, those emerging from the shelters will simply be killed. They counter that one could live underground for centuries, as there are vast reserves. Time is their main weapon. One could simply outlive the rest. A debate erupts among the corporate leaders, interrupted by Cooper's wife. She thinks primarily of her daughter and wants to secure the best future for her. In the future, Norman reaches a room where rows of cryo capsules stand with the names of those who slept in them, including all the wardens, his father among them. The action returns to the past, where Cooper's wife reveals that over 100 shelters have been built across America, so each of them could fulfill their wildest dreams. In the future, the robot explains to Norman that all these people were selected for their creative thinking and positivity. They are the country's best gene pool, destined to revive the nation after the surface is cleansed. In the past, the debate flares up again, as destroying so many people is not easy. Then Cooper's wife suggests to start the war themselves. A nuclear war is a tragedy, but also the greatest opportunity to start anew, because then there will be no one left to fight. They will become monopolists of the entire world. At this point, Cooper is distracted by a young man who would like to get an autograph, and this is Lucy's young father. In the present, Moldaver explains that the man has lived for a very long time. He is part of the corporation that orchestrated all this horror, but he never spoke about it to his wife. She was very smart. It was she who discovered that something was draining water from the shelter. She realized that civilization had returned, but her husband mocked her. Then the woman took the children and fled. They found a wonderful city, but her father came with his men and burned it down. Lucy brought Moldaver the cold fusion she developed and stolen by corporations, infinite energy with which life can be revived. Lucy sees a pendant on the mummy's neck that belonged to her mother and realizes what happened to her. Her father begs her not to believe Moldaver, but the girl demands that he give her the synthesis code. He relents and provides the numbers. The woman leaves for the laboratory to start the cold fusion process. Meanwhile, the robot informs Norman that it will not let him leave after what he has learned. At the same time, Lucy's father pleads with her to open the cage and return home, just as an alarm sounds and Brotherhood copters appear over the observatory, opening fire on the people below. Knights and their assistants descend to the ground and engage in battle with the observatory's defenders. Maximus rushes forward, searching for Lucy, while the knights wreak havoc around. Soon the knights burst inside the building, where they are suddenly stopped by a ghoul. It turns out he too once wore armor and knows their vulnerabilities. Thus he easily shoots the Iron Knights, remaining unharmed himself. At this time Lucy cries, torn between her father's pleas to come home and the terrible situation of her mother. But then at the room's threshold, a wounded knight falls, followed by Maximus. He opens the cage and rushes to Lucy. However, the girl confesses that it was her father who destroyed his wonderful city. Her father, meanwhile, dons armor and throws Maximus aside, knocking him unconscious. The girl pulls out a gun, but then the ghoul enters the room. When he learned Lucy's surname, he couldn't believe that this was the same guy from the corporation. He had waited over 200 years to find out where his family was. Lucy's father activates jet engines and flees. However, it turns out that this was exactly what the ghoul needed, as the man leaves a trail that can easily be followed to the place where the world's rulers are hiding, those who orchestrated the nuclear war. He urges Lucy to come with him. Then Lucy shoots the mummy, says goodbye to the unresponsive Maximus, and follows the ghoul. At the same time, an injured Moldaver returns to the room where Maximus regains consciousness. She has activated the nuclear synthesis, and now people have infinite energy. A stunned Maximus watches as surviving lanterns light up over the ruins of the city, while Moldaver smiles and dies. The Brotherhood members who rush in think their comrade killed the woman and celebrate Maximus as a future knight. Meanwhile, the ghoul and Lucy follow the trail of her father, who heads through the desert to a distant city. The series ends there.